Good evening, everyone. Town clerk tells me that it's 7 p.m., so it's time to get on with the 2019 Budget Committee meeting. This is actually a continuation of the meeting from December 16. We already heard disclosures from Mayor Kranz and Councillor Best on a couple items, so I won't be repeating them. But are there any additional disclosures? Councillor Melbloff?
I have a pecuniary interest. I, Councillor Rick Malbuff, hereby declare a potential pecuniary interest on today's date on item A3 of the budget decision package, the item titled Animal Services, and the nature of the pecuniary interest is I have a family member employed as a bylaw enforcement officer for the town of Milton.
Thank you. Did you get all that? Yep. All right. Magic. So I have a motion on the floor moved by Councillor Tesser-Turkson and seconded by Councillor Di Lorenzo that clause 1 to 16 of staff report CORS 68-18 be moved. All in favor? No, just kidding. So before we start, I know that many members probably have statements. Rather than you interviewing statement everywhere else, I'll just give you a chance. So anybody else would like to kick it off? Councillor Melbloff, you mentioned.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It comes as no surprise I may have some statements. Before we get into the budget debate, I have a few comments. This is my 15th municipal budget, and though some of the previous 14 have been difficult and controversial, I believe this one tops them all. This is the most politically sensitive budget I have seen. Staff has chosen to make the decision package more about politics than finding efficiencies. There are things in this budget that make no sense, Mr. Chair. I wonder what staff was thinking. For example, this budget removes school crossing guards at 3 of our busiest intersections of our town in order to save $31,000. Yet the budget includes a $10,000 expenditure for a pipe ban. So the way I see the fire department pipe ban is a greater priority than the safety and well-being of our children. I have a problem with that. Once again, in the decision package, staff has suggested we close Rotary Park and cancel the kids' summer camp program. Over the years, councils have made it very clear that this will not happen. Yet every year, it's in the decision package. Staff is suggesting we cut the weed control program after we have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars to deal with this issue, an issue that is front and center with our residents every spring. We all get the complaints about the sea of yellow along our boulevards and in our parks. Yet, it is being suggested that we cut back on those programs. Let's cut in this area, Mr. Chair, but let's not touch the Velodrome or the Arts Center. Nowhere in this budget document could I find any suggestions on how to reduce the $1.2 million operating deficit at the Velodrome or the $800,000 deficit at the Arts Center. It's okay to go after our kids and those most vulnerable in our community, but let's not dare go after the cycling or the living arts communities. Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair, I believe we are going to spend the next 3 to 4 hours looking at cutting programs that will impact service levels for our residents to save $10,000 here, $20,000 here, $30,000 somewhere else, in order to get the tax levy to an acceptable rate. But what frustrates me, Mr. Chair, we are going through all this to look at cutting services that will have an impact on Milton residents, yet we are going to end up spending close to $500,000 on the rebranding of Milton. In the past 8 years as a member of this council, which included 8 years on the Chamber Board of Commerce, not once did anybody approach me and say Milton needed a new logo and rebranding. And I have not seen one bit of evidence demonstrating how this rebranding has improved the lives of our residents. In fact, most of the comments I have heard have been negative. $500,000 fixing something that wasn't broke, while we eliminate crossing guards in order to save $31,000. Mr. Chair, as you know, I have seriously been considering bringing a motion forward that Council reject this budget and send it back to staff. Even if we were to support everything in the decision package, which is not going to happen, we would still end up with a tax increase of 3.8%, twice the rate of inflation. I'll hold off making that motion to see how things evolve tonight, but I suspect that that may be where we're going to end up. So that's all I have to say for now, so back to you and let the games begin.
Not yet. Mayor Kranz.
Well, Chairman, thank you very much. I certainly echo much of what Councillor Melbloff suggests there. One of the things that I've said many, many times, and still will say it here this evening, regardless of where we wind up at the appropriate time, I'll be calling for a recorded vote, as I always do, because I think it's important that the taxpayer in the town of Milton know year by year, and with this term of council, where every one of us stands, including myself, and I think that's vitally important, regardless whether the budget comes in at 2% or 10%, it doesn't matter. I still will call for a recorded vote. One of the things as well, Mr. Chairman, that I've said many, many times, and I'm more than prepared to get into the nickel and dimes, as I refer to it, and this is along the same lines as Councillor Melbu. If I have to, I will, but I really totally rely on staff to come in with what they think is their priorities, instead of you and I as individuals and our own respective priorities. But what's important is the priorities of the majority of this council, however that unravels here this evening. But again, one of the things that I don't do is cherry pick. But what I do and will support is something that's in, at, and around the rate of inflation. And I know inflation's roughly 2.5%, give or take, right now. So if a budget come in, say, roughly at 3%, could I live with that? Yes. But once you start to get to double the rate of inflation, say 4%, I would really and totally have to hold my nose to support something like even 4%. A lot of people would figure that's maybe achievable, and that might happen, but I can tell you, the jury is still out with me as to what I may or may not support. If it's triple, like 6 or 8% that's being suggested now, forget it. With my support, it's not going to happen. So let me predict, Mr. Chairman, what's being recommended here this evening by staff, in their opinion, it's not going to happen. But what will happen, whether it's tonight or another evening, budget will come in, I suspect, and hopefully, in the area of, 2.5% to 3.5%. That's what I'm predicting. And that's what I'm more than prepared to support at some point, whether it's tonight, tomorrow night, or next week. So thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that. We shall find out. Councillor Cluett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't belabor many of the points that have been made by Councillor Melbu from Mayor Krantz. I agree with a lot of them on there, and I do congratulate other members of council on their hard work and diligence in going through this budget. I know that a lot of since we've received this budget, many of us have had many long nights, bleary eyes, baggy eyes, and lots of coffee, as you can see in front of me, going over this budget, going over it line by line. And one of the things that I've always wanted to keep a focus on is we're a growing municipality. We have to accept that fact that we are growing in size and population, physically in height as well. So we have to keep in mind tonight that we have to make sure that we keep that balance between the wants and the needs of the municipality, of the corporation, as well as the wants and needs of the public. And we just finished an election campaign, so we heard a lot about those. So we just want to make sure that we keep that in mind and as we go forward tonight, and look forward to the debate.
Thank you, Councillor Cluett. Councillor Best.
And just echoing everybody's comments, just to highlight what the mayor's mentioned, this is our night. Staff have done the best they can in terms of coming up with a budget. We have to set our direction to staff and where we want to go. I have 11 motions coming to the floor, and I'd hope for support on all of them. We are going to have some compromises here. I'm looking forward to making it, because we're here to give us the best service with the least cost. So hopefully by 10, 11, 12 o'clock tonight, we'll get there.
Could not agree more. Councillor Challenor.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I am of the view that Councillor Melbu has expressed with respect to what may ultimately happen with this deliberation, and I'm fully supportive of that. This is not one of the best budgets I've seen, and I don't blame staff, quite frankly. I think that the direction of the last council was inadequate. The fact of the matter is that staff should be given direction before we get to this evening on where the budget should rest, and the budget should have been set likely at the rate of inflation, which is 2.6%. And like His Worship, I could live with 3. And I did pass around to those who were interested my thoughts in terms of how to get there. But the reality is, quite frankly, when I see the information that's in this budget, and when I see what I see over the last couple of months versus the 15 years I was here, that's why we need a core services review. And so perhaps the cart is before the horse. But the reality is that we will find the savings that we need to get to where we need to be and should be, and not damage service. But how it's delivered may change dramatically, and I'll give you an example. I shared with some members of council and yourself the transit situation. And there are 3 packages sitting before us this evening for our consideration. And the reality is we could probably save anywhere between $600,000 and $1 million on those 3 packages if they were delivered a different way and the infrastructure that delivered them was different. But we can't do that tonight. We can't do that until we go through a core services review, unless the direction of council is we'll get to that number through 2019, but the core services review needs to take a look at transit, and it needs to take a look at other models. So, and I suggested a model during the election campaign. I provided you with a financial background for that a couple of weeks ago. I don't have a lot of faith, quite frankly, based on what I've seen so far, that we're going to get very far this evening. You don't have enough information. There simply is not enough information in this document to help you get there. There's a bunch of politically unpopular alternatives. And I went through 15 years of doing this. This will be my 16th budget. And I've never seen so many politically unpopular possibilities here. And if any of you were around in the 1990s, I know some of you were, I don't know how old you were, but times were as tough then and tougher putting a budget together than they are today. I'm not saying that times aren't going to get tough here. They are. We have issues federally and provincially that are about to come upon us, as well as a possible recession. So, you know, are we prepared for that? And next year's budget may be tougher, but, you know, with a thorough core services review, it may not be as difficult as it may seem today. But I honestly think, and quite frankly, had I been in that chair back in November when this was put forward, I would have pushed it back. I would have said, let's do it over again. Because I know there are people sitting around this table, and maybe they won't admit it, they were very frustrated going through this document. I was very frustrated going through this document. That's not the way good budgets work. I've been a part of many, many budgets outside of this milieu as well. I was involved with 5 recycling boards. I was in business for 35 years. I've never seen a budget like this before. This has to be the last of this one. And don't be frustrated if we don't get very far this evening. And don't be frustrated if he comes forward with a motion saying back to staff, because that probably is the right thing to do.
Thank you, Councillor Challenor. Anyone else? Mayor Krantz?
Mr. Chairman, very quickly, as we go through this document, whoever's indicating where they want to go, if you would be so kind to maybe indicate every page so every one of us can follow the bouncing ball, that's going to be critical.
Will do.
I think just picking up on what Councillor Challenor has said there, that might be difficult to do because you're going to have to bounce around sometimes from 2 or 3 pages to try and make sense of it. So we'll try our best. So through your good guidance. Thank you.
We'll do that. Councillor Tess-Dirksen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Unlike many of my colleagues around the table, I don't have the benefit of many years of having gone through budget deliberations, so I will keep my comments short. I can appreciate the difficult job that staff had. the Milton of today is not the Milton of the year 2000 or 1995. We're changing, we're growing, and it's expensive, and I can appreciate that. However, I also happen to know that residents cannot afford the increase that's been proposed. And so our job is to go through and take a measured and balanced approach to ensure that the quality of life and the services provided to our constituents is not impacted, and that they can afford the services that we choose to give them. And I do believe that even though it may be financially, or even as it can be financially irresponsible to overspend, it may also be financially irresponsible to overinvest or underinvest at times as well. So I believe we're going to have to take a very careful approach to what we cut and what we, the type of Milton that we want to live in this year and going forward. My fear is that too many cuts or too much underinvestment may result in us being around this table next year with an even higher proposed increase from staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dirksen. I could not agree more. Anybody else? Thank you, everyone. I do agree with most the sentiments mentioned. It is a fairly challenging budget, by far the most challenging of my career, and mostly because we live in a province that mandates growth but refuses to allow us to make sure growth pays for itself. And as a result, we face some serious financial challenges related to growth. That combined with the fact that we have aging infrastructure, and we're not really funding our infrastructure deficit as well as we should be, it results in this budget. But I do know that every single person around the table, regardless of where we end up, but every single person around the table wants to make sure that taxpayers get the best value for their money. So while we disagree, I know that that sentiment is there, and this is our opportunity to figure out what kind of Milton we want to live in. All right, let's move on. So there were questions circulated by councillors to staff. Answers to those questions were sent out to council in December. Are there any other questions for staff before we proceed? Seeing none, moving on. So we're first going to address any motion related to the non-operating budget motions, that motions 1 to 11. After all the motions have been discussed, we'll hold off final voting. So in previous year, if you remember, we would vote on the capital budget first, then the operating budget, but this year we'll hold off because I suspect we might have to come back to it. So we'll go through motions 1 to 11, but we won't vote until we finalize the operating budget as well. Are there any amendments or debate? I have a list of motions, by the way. If you already have given motions, I will read them myself. But before that, are there any amendments or debate dealing with anything other than the operating budget, which is clause 1 to 11? All right, let's go through motions. So the first motion I have is moved by Councillor Best that signage, including the High Point Pond, professional fees, contingency, and applicable capital administration surcharge expenses in capital budget C101125, branding, Town of Milton, be reduced by $263,925. Any seconder? Councillor Malbouf. Councillor Best, since you're the mover, going to go first. And also, can you mention what page it's in?
That's page 208. Sorry, actually 119, thank you.
Thank you.
I've got a number of motions here, as you can notice. As Councillor Malbouf mentioned, I agree with the branding. This sign that has been there for over 20 years is really basically invisible from the town. It's a duplication of the sign we have in the water tower. I commend staff on the branding exercise so far, but I don't think we need to spend any more money on it. Let's stick down to what is necessary. This isn't necessary for this budget. We can put it off, and if we don't need the sign, sell it for scrap, because any sign manufacturer can tell you, you don't put a sign parallel to the road. You put it at 90 degrees so people can actually see it. So let's save the money.
Councillor Malfoy as a seconder. Anyone else? All in favor? Carries. Next motion is also moved by Councillor Best that the 2019 capital project C330150 special event pedestrian safety study in the amount of $31,051 be eliminated from the capital budget, as well as the 2020 capital forecast of $158,268. Any seconder? Councillor Malbeuf. Yes, Councillor Best.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if you look on page 208, this is where I'm coming up with. I understand where staff, in light of recent events, are concerned, but I've been involved with special events downtown for over 40 years. I figure on an estimate there's 25 street closures a year between farmers markets, special events, and the parades. And if I got the first picture up on the screen, I do bring pictures. I talked to my colleagues at Burlington, Oakville, and Hamilton regarding their special events, and the police. We're getting there. This is what the police use during the holiday market, as well as the street festival when they're having their sections there, as well as the car show. Basically, you have two cars with a police car backing up. I've been to 3 events that if the staff recommendation would go through, ambulance wouldn't be able to get through. Police have recommended that you need to have emergency access. Having retractable bollards, if the staff, the next picture, please. If you could just enlarge that, if possible. These are basically what staff are recommending, which I do not encourage, because I don't think we have that much danger that this would be similar to downtown, where you need 3 sets of these, because the farmers market and the other special events have different locations. This is reminiscent of a U.S. embassy. I don't think we have that type of concern. If we do, the previous picture shows how the police are recommending. And all I can see is a lot of maintenance issues, and we already have a crosswalk that needs fixing at Main and Martin. So I'd leave it at that and let council decide.
I don't think you're going to get much disagreement. Councillor Cloet.
Just another quick comment about the events that happened in downtown Milton. Obviously, with the Miracle on Main Street, very similar setup is done by the police, where they cordon off the sections with vehicles, and to go through something that extensive, I think, would be a little bit excessive. And I agree with the motion. I'll be supporting it.
Anyone else? All in favor? Carries. Motion, also Councillor Best. Why don't I just give you the microphone, Councillor Best? The staff be directed to review alternate lower-cost walkway solutions for the buoyancy and crossing of tracks with respect to project C310108, Point Pedestrian Railway Crossing. Councillor Best, any seconder? Councillor Cloet, do you want to mention the page number as well, Councillor Best?
Yeah, this is page 228. This is not so much for this year, but for future years. Staff are estimating $5.2 million for a walkway over the CN tracks. I understand staff have to use the best estimates they can find, but our previous walkway over the CP tracks just to the east of Thompson Road cost $3 million. This is a 60% increase. What I'm asking staff, is there any way of reducing this? I've given them some manufacturers that can also do channel crossings. I think this kind of spending, even if it comes from development charges, is really a tax on new homeowners. I'm looking at other alternatives, such as builders contributing some of the dirt that they're moving to create ramps and things. Give everybody an estimate. The underpass for Tremaine Road on north of Steeles Avenue for a 4-lane expressway is $21 million. This is like a 10-foot wide walkway, so I'm very concerned with the costs, implications in future years, and the maintenance. If everyone remembers the problem we've had with the glass there, and I commend staff on trying to make it as vandal-proof as possible. But this is just more tax on people for in future years. So let's nip it in the bud.
Absolutely, Councillor Lee.
I agree with Councillor Best. Thank you, Chairman. I agree with Councillor Best that we need to direct the staff to find more cost-effective ways of building this. But I do want to say that we should do this because we have a proposed high school in that area. And I had a meeting with the HDSB chair, and she tells me the construction is delayed. So I think we can afford to push it back and come back later to it, but we need to make sure we do it because it's really important with a high school close to it. It's a safety concern.
Thank you. Councillor Clewett.
She said exactly what I was thinking, because I know myself, back when we were in our different ward setups, we met with the school board trustees at the time, and they stressed the importance of having this walkway, but it has to be, as Councillor Best mentioned, you know, a Cadillac versus a Toyota. Whatever we can do to keep people safe, great, but we want to make sure that we keep an eye on the bottom line as well. So,
anyone else? All in favor? Carries. Next motion, guess who moved it? Councillor Best. That staff be directed to review alternate building sites for the transit facility C550103. Seconder, Councillor Clewett. Councillor Best.
Yeah, actually, the quote is alternative building styles. This is on page 278. I understand staff are using examples from such municipalities as Oakville and Burlington, and I know Metrolinx has a large facility north of 5 Side Road. I've been to a number of conferences and seen examples from manufacturers which I've given staff where the same size type of facility could be done for about $2 to $3 million. And I understand that staff have to project these out in the future. And there's a number of examples throughout the United States and Canada of these type of facilities that are a lot cheaper and, you know, just as durable as facilities are proposing. And also, considering the way transit's going over the next few years, who knows if we're going to even have a transit system. So I'd ask staff to be very cautious in spending any money on this, because we could have a super Metrolinx or a regional transit or something else. It's no sense us building a facility that may not be needed.
Anyone else? All in favor? Carries. Next motion, that's moved by Councillor Best, that staff be requested to review alternate locations for the Milton Senior Activity Center before any large capital expenditures. Seconder, Councillor Clewett, Councillor Best.
Yeah, it's just on this issue. I've gone over this with staff previously, and the staff have some other ideas. My concern is this is an almost 60-year-old facility. No matter what you do to it, people still have the idea that, oh yeah, this is where we used to take grandma. It's not something that's enticing to people under 70 to come into, and it's also in the middle of a development area in the implementation plan for Allendale. So I just ask staff to keep an open mind. Council provides some direction that we're not wedded to this facility. There could be some alternatives coming up very soon, as I know yourself, the Mayor, Councillor Malbus and Clewett are aware of that. You know, we're looking at a regional facility here. It may be advantageous to be locating somewhere else on this property rather than spending $800,000 over the next 10 years.
I agree. Councillor Clewett, as a seconder.
Yeah, just to echo those things, there's already been a master plan for that area south of where the Milton Mall is, south of Childs, for redevelopment in sort of 4 different segments. And if we go ahead and making these, we haven't finalized that plan. You know, it hasn't even come close yet. So before we even, finalize what the master plan for that area is, we could hold off on making these expenditures at the senior center.
Thank you, Councillor Challoner.
I think we need to hear the perspective of staff on this, because you need to continue to invest in the building to ensure that it is safe and that it performs the tasks that it was purchased for and refitted for back in the 90s. Because what we're talking about here is, you know, what I'm hearing is we don't have a definite plan on the other side. A master plan is not a plan. It's not an investment. It's a master plan, and it's not approved yet. So maybe if we heard from staff in terms of their thinking on this building before we decide the fate.
Absolutely. Ms. Scott?
Through the chair to Councillor Challoner, I did discuss this motion with Councillor Bass, and we have had a number of conversations about the senior centre in general. So the number that Councillor Bass quoted is over the next 10 years, and we look at our asset as a life cycle, and we do condition audits and whatnot. We're not anticipating any large capital expenditures other than the creature comforts, washroom updates, paint, furniture, things like that, over the course of the next 10 years. So we're comfortable with the motion as it is. Council will vote as per the normal course of business on the capital budget, so you will see what staff are submitting for the senior center year over year.
But you're comfortable that you've got the financials that you required to properly maintain that facility in 2019?
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else? Mayor Krantz.
Just, Mr. Chairman, I'm just wondering through the appropriate staff person if there's been any or much discussion at the regional level in their involvement with this building and what their thoughts are. And I know you, Mr. Chairman, you're on that particular committee now, but it's early on in the term, and there's probably been no discussion at that level whatsoever. But staff to staff, I'm just wondering at the regional level.
Absolutely. Commissioner, do you want to do that?
I'm looking at Barb too. She's been involved in this project. There's been nothing as of late specific to the senior center. I know they're looking at doing the Allendale development in a phased approach. I wouldn't want to misquote in case something has changed where the senior center sits in those phases. I'm not sure, Barb, if you have any other updates.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, what we are looking at with our counterparts at the region is a fully integrated development as a key focal point to our urban growth center, supporting walkability, supporting transit, so multi-use buildings, integrated programs, services, buildings that will best serve a wide spectrum of needs. So we are not necessarily encouraging a purpose-designed building, but rather something that's integrated that can have a lot of ancillary facilities that also support a range of uses, including the senior center.
Thank you, Mayor Krantz.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, timing, Ms. Koopmans, on what's the thoughts in that area?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I have not heard of any specific timing. We are continuing to work with our regional counterparts, emphasizing the design area, integrating it with our major transit station area study, initiatives being undertaken with Go Transit, and other redevelopment opportunities that are happening in the area so that everything is coordinated and comprehensively redeveloped.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, motions on the floor. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Carries. So these are all the motions I have on the non-operating budget part. There is one more. Just wanted to see if you were paying attention. You passed my test. Congratulations. Another motion that staff be requested to review long-term implications before any proposed improvements to the Memorial Arena. Moved by Councillor Best. Any seconder? Councillor Malbouf? Yes, Councillor Best, do you have anything to add?
Yes, it's my last capital item. Just regarding this item, it's on page 323. Of your budget books, if you want to look at it. Similar to the situation in the senior center. This is a single pad arena, which anybody that's in the arena field knows that basically single pads aren't efficient operations. It's been upgraded over the last 10 years, but looking at the long-term implications of being in the urban growth center, there may be some alternatives for this property and this building, and possibly relocating it and making a twin pad or something more efficient with the possibly Boyne or the Dairy Green Community Center. So I'm asking for council support to basically keep the door open and have staff look at alternatives before we spend too much money, because in the life cycles, I understand that, as Councillor Challoner mentioned, that we have to maintain facilities. We have to make sure we're not, investing in something that we could be tearing down in a few years' time.
Councillor Melba for seconder. Anyone else? Councillor Challoner?
Yeah, I support what Councillor Best is saying, but I will say that in the case of what is proposed here, one of the two items, in fact, could be moved to a new facility and reused. So I don't see that as a major issue. I certainly agree with his comment, and I'll be supportive of what he's proposing, but essentially the infrastructure can be moved.
Anyone else? All in favor? Carries. Are there any other motions from the non-operating part of the budget?
Yeah, I have a question concerning deferring the implementation of the Appleby line construction. I would like to get some comments from the councillors in that area. Is that, because I understood there were some discussion about doing that.
Councillor Best, go for it.
Yes, as Mr. Cripps has mentioned, this is not on the table tonight, but I will be raising a couple of items when the environmental assessment comes back. We're still going through that process, which really can't spend any money until we've gone that. If staff can put up my third picture. Yes, I do have some more. If we can just, there. Yeah, this is a signage of both the top and the bottom. It basically says trucks and prohibited, but no fine information. According to the police I spoke with, the fine for getting stuck there is $110. I've asked clerks to review this and find out what we can do, because any time that we've had to call emergency services staff, including our fire department, and you've seen some of the pictures that residents presented, it's probably about $4,000 to $10,000 to extract those, and we've had serious situations where we've had tanker trucks stuck on here on the hairpin turn. So that's one of my short-term ideas to put it. But basically, when it comes down to the long term, if you go to the next picture. Here's another suggestion as well, to cut down on the real problem on Appleby Line, if anyone's driven it, is large trucks are trying to go up and down this hill, and they're basically not, the GPS says, oh, you can go this way, even though there's 4 other ways up and down the escarpment. If anyone's familiar with this location, this is the type of bars you have going into underground parking lots, which you could have over the road, basically having poles on both sides, so that emergency vehicles can go through. But if you're driving a tall truck more than 9 foot high, you hit these rubberized bars and you know it. Trust me, I've driven through one of these, and I figured, you're not supposed to go here. It's similar to the situation we had, or Toronto had, with their streetcar tunnel, when people driving down. If we could do this here, because Rattlesnake Point's a unique road. If we, in today's circumstances, it would never be built. It's environmentally, but we have some issues there in terms of springs and runoff, as mentioned by the residents and staff. Staff last year did extensive work on 14 Side Road, includes of doing the shoulder work, which I support, as well as the drainage. But in terms of widening and expropriating, I don't think we're there. You just have to look at Charles Street in town. It used to be 2 lanes. We narrowed it to 1 lane to keep it within the current area and preserving mature trees in the creek bank. So I think there should be some alternatives here, and I look forward to staff coming back with the environmental report. And thank you, Councillor Melville, for reminding me.
Councillor Challoner?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things, couple comments. The first thing is that looking at a height bar is a good idea. It wasn't so long ago that, in fact, that road was closed between November and April 1st. And that is also a consideration if this generation of community that lives there is supportive of that. The last generation was quite supportive of it. I disagree to a point on the work on the road. The fact of the matter is you can't get to dealing with the runoff unless you, in fact, redo the road. The road is not sufficient today. It needs to be repaired. And there are fundamental things you've got to do to repair it, and it's going to cost money. Does it need to be widened? I agree with Colin, it doesn't. But there needs to be ditches. There needs to be other things introduced down that hill that make it easier to go up and down, that make it easier for water to get up and get down. Water doesn't go up, except in New Brunswick, I guess. But anyway, I wouldn't look at this as a project that doesn't get done. In fact, it does need to get done. It's how it gets done. And there are some interim things. His height bar is one, perhaps a partial seasonal closure of that road is another. And it will have to be well marked. It's not well marked today. Colin's right. The marking there does not warrant a driver that he can't go down that hill.
Thank you. Councillor Tessa Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo the sentiments of Councillor Best and Councillor Challoner. We've been engaging with residents on Appleby Line to a pretty extensive extent on their concerns and the impact to them. The fact of the matter is it's a kind of a unique little road, and residents need some kind of immediate temporary relief from these trucks, and so do we. I mean, it's expensive, as Councillor Best mentioned, when these large vehicles get stuck there. So making it clear to drivers that there is going to be a serious repercussion to them disobeying the law by traversing this road with their large vehicles, I think is a good start. And I also agree with Councillor Challoner that the road is in poor repair, there's drainage issues. I think there's a happy medium to be found here, because I think the project as proposed is maybe the Cadillac that we were talking about earlier that we don't necessarily need in that area. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of compromise we're able to come up with. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Melbourne. Do you have anything else? All right, let's move on. So we're done with the non-operating budget, non-operating part of the budget. We're not going to vote now, and if you think of something else, feel free to move it later. You'll have the chance. Now, a couple of reminders before we begin with motions related to the operating budget. The decision package has 3 sections, A, B, and C. Section A, which starts from page 86. It represents options to reduce the tax impact to the staff recommended level. The recommended tax levy assumes that all the items in Section A have already been removed from the budget. And that means that should council wishes to add back any item, it will need to raise the motion to that effect. So when you go to Section A, when we vote for an item, we'll vote to add them to the budget. Section B, which starts from page 93, and I'll explain that again when we get to the section. Section B, which starts from page 93, gives us option to further reduce the tax impact. These items are in the budget, and we'll have to move a motion to remove them from the budget. We will go through Section A and Section B line by line, so we don't jump around and try to keep it in order. There's also a Section C, which starts from page 106. These are not in the budget, and we won't be going through Section C line by line. So if somebody wishes to add something from Section C, I'll give them a chance to move the motion at the end. There's a number of pre-circulated motions. There's some that are related to the decision package. When we get to those points, I'll read them out loud. There's some additional motions that are not related to the decision package. I will read them after we've gone through the decision package. Then we get the number from staff and take a brief break and come back and probably do this a few more times. All clear as mud. Councillor Malbouf.
Okay, so this is a little different than what we used to do, because it was, these are the decision package. We decide whether we want them in the budget, whether we accept these decisions or not. So what you're saying, and for everybody's clarification, is that everything that is in Section A will be taken out of the budget to get to the 7.6, unless certain things are put back in. So
That's
right
exactly
now, the protocol or the policy is going to be, if you want something added back in, that's the motion you have to bring forward, rather than the way we used to do it, saying we approve that line item.
That's right. Section B is what we used to do. Section A will have to add in. That is correct. Let's start. So we're at page 86. All the items in Section A have already been removed. We can actually go through page 84 if you like. All the items in Section A have already been removed. So does any member of council wish to move to add Section A1? Yes, Councillor Best.
Yes, on number A1, this is page 84. Let me get this straight here. The subdivision revenues, we're eliminating the declining structure. This is, because the way you worded it there for the public and some councillors is that, we just wiped out all this section, or we have to add in each one if you want it back in the budget. I'm
going to look at you, Glenn, to do a better job than I've done.
So all the items in Section A are built into the 7.63%. I'll use this as the specific example. So subdivision revenues, we've assumed that we're getting rid of the declining block structure, and therefore revenues will go up. So part of the way we were able to get down to 7.6 was by building in this additional revenue source. When we get to the other items, which are more in the way of cost decreases, I'll take transit as the next one. We've assumed that we're eliminating evening transit to get down to 7.6%. So if there's a motion, and there is a motion to review that transit option, we would need that motion basically to bring that service back.
That's clear, so you don't need a motion on A1 then.
All right. Seeing none, we'll move on to A2. And I have a pre-circulated motion in A2, moved by Councillor Best, that extended evening transit service be continued to a revised ending time of 10 p.m., resulting in a net increase to the recommended operating budget of $203,984. Councillor Cluett, are you seconding it? Yes. Councillor Best, at a mover?
Yes, thank you. And this is something that we've had a number of issues about over the years, and I understand where some councillors are coming from. In our present format, before we have a core services review, I can't see, and I watch the buses just as much as other councillors, once you get past 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, there's very few people riding, and especially when you're paying $125 an hour per bus. That was our latest quote, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong. But in terms of the ridership, a lot of it is students that are working at retail stores and recreation facilities till 9:30 at night. 10 o'clock allows some flexibility for them to get home without having to call a taxi, which basically wipes out their, whatever they made at work. So this is a compromise to start with. I look forward to any other motions in other areas, but basically the level of service we have here, and you compare it to other communities, is very minimal. And I think, Mr. Chairman, you've highlighted this before, that we don't have the efficiency when we have such little service to begin with. I'm looking forward to the options that Councillor Challoner has mentioned, but we're not there yet. We need to get a program in place, and hopefully as part of the core service review, we can look at some of the other alternatives for evening service.
All right, Councillor Cluett, as a seconder, anything to add?
Very similar comments, because we're looking at staff had circulated to council the different revenue passengers for the different parts of the transit, and to eliminate the extended service in the evening. The revenue passengers for the evening is 11,807 revenue passengers, and that's excluding the transfers. So as part of the core services review that we're going to be under, that we'll be able to make a better informed decision going forward. And we're also working on our transit master plan going forward this year as well. So we'll have a lot more information, make a better decision. So I support the not eliminating it, but obviously paring it back a little bit going forward until we can make a more informed decision. Thank you. Councillor Malbov.
Yeah, I understand where Councillor Best and Councillor Cluett are coming from, but again, I've been arguing this point for years. It was, as far as I'm concerned, it was a mistake to implement this service. I knew it would be almost impossible to get rid of it, but the ridership, even between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock, does not justify the $200,000 it's going to cost us. So I'm supporting what's in the decision package, and we'll see where it goes.
Councillor Challoner.
I'm supportive of what Councillor Best is proposing. I'm entirely sympathetic with what Councillor Malbov is saying. I think I have the appropriate answer. I just wish we could implement it tomorrow, and then we wouldn't be having this discussion. But unfortunately, we have the cart before the horse once again.
Councillor Ali?
I also support Councillor Best, and I just want to wish that we can utilize this towards the morning hours, because there are areas of Milton where we could use more frequent buses. Buses are coming hours apart, which does not work for a commuter town like Milton, especially the southwest of Milton. And this is just me wishing that can happen. I know the transit master plan is in the works, and I hope they're listening to what I'm saying. Thanks.
Councillor Malbov.
Just I know where this is going, but here we are in the second item, and we just added $200,000 to the budget.
Anyone else? All in favor? Carries. Next, we have A3. Any mover? This is what Councillor Malbov has conflict on. Councillor Di Lorenzo?
I would put a motion to put A3 back in the budget. I think removing emergency response for animals is we all have pets.
Before you start, I'm sorry, let me just get a seconder. Is there a seconder? Councillor Challoner.
I know people are not satisfied with the animal services that the town currently has, but having a total elimination I don't think is the answer. I would recommend we look at alternatives, either going back to the Oakville and Burlington Humane Society or some other model, but a complete elimination of response for animals or shelter for animals I don't think is in the best interests of Milton residents.
Councillor Challoner, is a seconder?
Yeah, I agree with what Councillor Di Lorenzo has said. This is not the answer. This is one of those core services. And is it delivered as best it might be? No, it's not. And it'll go under the core services review microscope and we'll make it better. But this is not the answer tonight, getting rid of it.
Councillor Cluett?
I guess a question to staff. I know that I received a number of phone calls and emails about this because people were worrying, are we going to have dead animals lying all over the town? Or if their cat or dog goes missing, will no one care? If we can find it, because I remember, and I can't remember exactly when we switched from our animal services from the Oakville Milton Humane Society to the Burlington Animal Services, and I can't remember what year that was. Will that contract ever come up again to provide the services for Milton?
Is that...
Mr. Chairman, yes, the contract comes up, I believe it's in 5-year increments. Right now, just to be clear, the City of Burlington provides our shelter only. Internal staff provide the officers to deliver the service.
I know because when we went back, when the contract was, so it was 5 years ago. Wow, time flies. When the contract was switched from the Oakville Milton Humane Society, the big difference was cost, and not service, not quality of service. We all enjoy, and I know many of us support the Oakville Milton Humane Society as a whole for their mud struts and other fundraising items and as such. But this is again a lot. You're going to hear it over and over tonight. Core services review, I think, will figure this out. So in the meantime, as other councillors worry about money coming back in, I think we're going to have to keep going forward on this, providing the service, and then when that, again, the core services review and the contract comes up, we might be able to find something more cost effective.
Thank you. Mayor Krantz, did you have a comment? Or okay. Anyone else? Councillor Tessa-Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My colleagues have already covered most of the comments, but I think we have to remember Milton still has a very large rural area where we have lots of animals and incidents with animals. I've had a lot of residents in those areas reach out to me very concerned about this budget item being further cut because the services as they are now are you know, fairly thin. I believe, I could be wrong, but maybe staff can direct me, on weekends and after hours, is there an emergency outside? I had to call once for a goose that got hit on the road, and I know I kept getting put through to different departments.
Go for it.
Mr. Chairman, after hours and evening, calls are answered by the fire dispatch because we have staff on, and if it's an emergency, staff would be dispatched to deal with it. However, if it's a stray animal, we don't consider that an emergency to dispatch staff immediately. We would go to attend the residents the next day.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, the motion's on the floor. All in favor? See your hands. Oh, it carries. All right, A4 is the passive weed control program. I'm looking for a mover to add it back. Councillor Di Lorenzo, any seconder? Councillor Best, sorry, now start. Councillor Di Lorenzo, do you want to speak first as a mover?
So I know we as a council have taken this out and put it back in, and now we're talking about taking it out again. We have had town staff mention before that this is, if we're looking at having turf maintenance, it's a long-term investment, and doing it for 1 year is not going to make a significant impact. So I think council has to step up and say this is a long-term decision to keep it in or to remove it and not keep on contemplating it every year, because then if we take it out this year and then we get all these complaints, when we put it back in next year, then we've just thrown that money down the drain, in my opinion. So the previous council has made a decision to have the weed control in for both high-profile areas and low-profile areas. I don't consider village squares low-profile areas, but I understand it is low-profile from community parks or other areas. So the residents I've spoken to have spoken very loud and clear that they would like this weed control to remain in, and I'm hoping a majority in council would do that, and that this is a long-term decision, not something we change from year to year.
So I have Councillor Best, Councillor Challoner, Councillor Melbourne, and then Councillor Cluett as a seconder. I think Councillor Challoner.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I guess I just want to know from staff when this program was initially brought in. I think it was in reaction to the decision by the province of Ontario to ban chemical pesticides. There was a point in time where we were using those quite effectively, and of course, as a result of that, then you're forced to change how you deal with weed control. So how long has this program been in place?
Commissioner Cripps, do you want to answer the question?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. I believe the program started in 2015, and then in 2016 it was canceled, and then it was reestablished in 2017 and 2018. So this would be the 4th year, but of a non-continuous program.
Through you to Mr. Cripps, how effective is the program, and how effective could it be if we had chemical pesticides?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I can't speak to the pesticide issue, but I can tell you that since the program has been initiated, I would say our number of calls for dandelion control have dramatically decreased. Just for some of the council members who may not be totally aware of the program, basically what it is in the springtime, there's a 6-week period where these areas get cut 3 times a week rather than the traditional 1 time per week. And then in addition to that, we do fertilization, aeration, and overseeding of these areas. So I would say that the program has been moving along and has been effective in controlling these weeds.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Challoner. Councillor Melbourne.
As Councillor Del Rendo said everything I was going to say, and like I stated in my opening comment, I think it would be a major mistake to cancel again. You know, we did it once before. We spent $500,000 and then canceled it the year after, start all over again. That's what we're looking at here. We've all heard the complaints, so I'll support the motion, put it back in, because again, this is what the residents want their tax dollars used for. So, you know, that's what we should be doing.
Councillor Cluett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the benefit of the public, I know that Commissioner Cripps sort of highlighted the increased number of cuts. When it says reduce the weed control to continue providing in high-profile areas, this does not include, just for clarification, this does not include soccer fields where our kids play, sports, baseball areas.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, cut A4 is strictly for linear parks, village squares, and the local road boulevards that the town maintains.
So we'll have our kids tangled up in weeds, playing soccer and such. I know, again, it's one of the things that a lot of us, some of us that were around the table back in 2015, supported. Back in my old days as a worker, I used to work as an account manager for Green Lawn, and that was one of the ways that we told people to get rid of weeds, is to increase the thickness of the turf. And I know the number of calls to me from residents have definitely declined, and actually calls saying that things have improved. So if we keep going with the bouncing ball, nothing's going to get done. So I'd like to continue. And this is definitely something that I would tell to the taxpayers. This is an investment in our community.
Anyone else? Not to act like a 2-year-old, but I'm not voting for a budget that doesn't have weed control, so you'll have to do it without me. With that, all in favor? Carries. Let's move on to A5. Seeing none, A6. Clue it, is it A5 or A6?
I believe, yeah, it was A5.
Okay, so Councillor Cluett, what are you moving exactly? Because you have many different options. Before we get a second.
That's what I wanted to double check. What page was that on? My apologies. No one's going anywhere tonight anyways, right? Oh, you need specific line items?
No, A5 says increase user fees 1% for select services over and above the previously approved 2019 increase. I'm assuming that you're moving to
add it back in.
Add it back in. Understood. Before I get a seconder, can you please explain what that exactly that means? Because a lot of us are confused.
That's what I'm looking for, clarification here. Where are we going with this?
Exactly.
No, yeah, that's, I might be confused as well. Thank you.
Through the chair. So within the recommended budget as is, there is a total additional increase to the selected user fees of 4%. So these options are essentially to start scaling that back, therefore removing the related revenue. So $75,000 worth of revenue would come out and would reflect an increase on the tax rate with that one line item.
Withdraw.
Okay, anyone else? Seeing none, moving on. A6. A7. Councilor Malbuff.
This is where I need some clarification. If I'm supportive of increasing user fees by 3%, do I move a motion to put this back in? Or is it the other way around like it used to be?
Good point. Glenn.
So right now with the 4% in there, we've broken it up into 4 line items. To get it down to a 3% increase, we would need to approve one of these line items. And then a second line would bring it to 2, a third to 1, and then if you approve all 4, it would eliminate the increase entirely.
So Councilor Malbuff, with A7, if we don't do anything, we'll be at 3%, and if you want to stay at 3%, you'll add A8 back in. So you can leave A7 as is.
Okay, well, I want to make the motion to put A7 in the 3% increase.
A7 would, I'm going to go back to staff. So adding A7 in, my understanding is, would take it to 2% if A8 also passes. If you want it to be 3%, you would want to put A8 back in.
Make it councillor proof, okay? I want user fees to be increased by 3%.
Right.
What do we do? All right. Do I move this motion or do I ignore it?
Through the chair, if we can approve A5, that would bring the 4% increase down to 3%, and that's as far as you would need to go. The other items will continue to reduce it beyond 3%, closer and closer to 0.
Got it. So
A5.
There's a motion on the floor to move it to 3%. Staff will figure it out. Seconder, Councillor Best. Seconder for Councillor Malbuff's motion. First, Councillor Cluett. Okay, now question, Councillor Best.
Just let me understand this, because we're doing a double negative here in terms of each one of these A5 to A8, because we had 2 delegations here from the Milton Marlins and the hockey team saying we've already paid a huge increase, we're losing membership, we're basically putting people at risk here, and we want to increase even more. I can't support that.
So just so I'm clear and everybody else is clear, the motion right now is to freeze the increase at 3% instead of the 4%, which is in the budget right now. Moved by Councillor Malbuff, seconded by Councillor Cluett. Any other comments? All in favor of Tessa Dirksen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 4 children, and at different points in their upbringing, they have all been in these programs. And yes, it gets expensive, especially when you're multiplying everything by 4. That being said, I don't know if it's appropriate for the entire community to essentially subsidize that for my children or anyone's children. So I think it's appropriate to see some increase in user fees, whether or not it's a 1, 2, or 3, or 4%. I think that stands to be debated, but I think we should keep in mind that yes, it benefits the community to an extent as a whole, but I wouldn't expect the entire tax-paying public to subsidize my kids' recreational activities. That being said, I believe there should be some kind of merit-based system for people who cannot actually afford to put their children in these programs to be able to access some kind of financial support so that they can on a needs basis. Thank you.
Understood. So Councillor Challenor, Councillor Best, Councillor Di Lorenzo.
My question relates to how we're looking at user fees to begin with. I know how we were looking at them, and I don't know what process the previous council went through in arriving at this recommendation. So I'd like to know, where are we? And previously, it wasn't uniform. User fees increased based on the program and based on the town infrastructure the program was using. And some organizations were large enough that they participated in maintaining that infrastructure. So I'm kind of surprised that we're looking at uniform increases. First of all, that's a bit of a departure from my experience, but I kind of want to know when was the last time we looked at user fees. And while you're answering that question, not only for sports programs, but also for our facilities. So arena usage as an example. And how often are we looking at it?
Commissioner Scott, or either one of you, doesn't matter.
Sure, through the chair. So with all of our user fees, we do undertake the detailed periodic reviews. We target every 3 to 5 years. In the case of community services, we did a bit of an interim update last year because it was more of a financial cost pressure exercise given some of the changes in things like Bill 148. The year prior, we did a complete market analysis to see where our fees were. And typically in the extensive reviews that we do, we then also go through the full cost recovery exercise. So for some program areas, it means that when we look at full cost recovery, we look to the fees to reflect that. And as you say, during those detailed exercises, the impact on various fees is different. It's not uniform. It is reflective of those specific services. In this case, the options in front of you, to be clear for one thing, these are over and above the increases that were already approved. So in last year's process, we approved, for example, including things like inflation in the fees. The fees in front of you here are in addition to those, and they're strictly from a perspective of looking at the financial pressures and realizing that the tax base isn't potentially the only avenue the council has in front of it to try to address some of those cost pressures.
Chairman, did I read correctly that it was about a 2% increase that was proposed in the last 12 months for 2019-20, roughly?
For the the inflationary portion of it, it was 2.3%, and then in some other areas as well, there was some additional increases made through the report last year as well.
Well, this would be in addition to that. Yeah, that's why I can't support this motion.
Thank you for that. I had Councillor Best, then Di Lorenzo.
Further to Councillor Challoner's question, when do those new rates take effect?
It varies by the specific service, just recognizing where we will be in the year when this budget is approved and when the next time for the specific service kind of makes the most sense from a communication and a programming perspective.
Just to council, I agree with Councillor Challoner that, as indicated by the delegations, that one of them, I believe this in Marlin's, had a 4% increase on top already, and as staff are aware that we already had a problem at the sports center with basically losing a month. So it's almost a double whammy for them. Basically, you can't use a facility for almost a month, but we're also increasing your charges. So I don't think that's going to go over well.
Councillor Di Lorenzo.
So I'm not happy with the proposal. I understand we're just going from 2.3 to 5.3%, but I think the budget's going to be 5% or higher. So I agree with what Councillor Tessler-Dirksen was saying about, we're subsidizing other people who don't use their service, or subsidizing people who do use their service. I do have children who do use the pool rentals, who do use some of the child youth programs. So this is going to, I'm not declaring a conflict of interest, but this is affecting a lot of us who have children and families. And I'm in support of the increase. That's it.
All right, Councillor Challoner.
I just want to make it clear that I kind of knew what the answer was that I was getting, but I think everybody needed to hear it, quite frankly. And I completely agree with what Councillor Tesser-Dirksen said. Totally get that, and that's why, quite frankly, you know, back in the 90s, we started this process. It was Wally Hunter, actually, who suggested it, Councillor Hunter, and we used to review it on an annual basis, as staff will remember. And yeah, it's a lot of work. The notion was that we stay close to market, but we make it affordable. So, and Councillor Tesser-Dirksen should know that we also created a hardship program. There was a program in place before the 1990s. There's been a program in place in this community in that regard for decades. There still is that program. I don't think it's quite right to, on top of 2.3%, add more. And we don't know what the final cost of this year's budget is going to be, so let's not assume that it's going to be 5% or something like that. You need to deal with these issues as they are on an individual basis, and I don't think this is reasonable. Again, you know, the point was made by Councillor Malboof at the very beginning. It's a very political budget. Welcome to one of the first political decisions. I can't support it. I don't support the motion. I don't think it's right. And I think that there's going to be a kind of feedback you don't want to hear if this does get passed.
So let me jump in and clarify something. The budget as proposed includes the 4% increase on top of what was already increased. Councillor Melbuff is proposing reducing that 4% to 3%. So if you're not in support for increase, then you should be supporting that motion. Maybe move a motion to reduce it further. But at this moment, this motion aims to reduce that 4% increase down to 3%.
The correct motion would be to not support any of the four that are there with that basically put a tariff on top of the 2.3%. Otherwise, the tariff is going ahead. That's how I read it.
So the way I understand it, anyone can move the motion to, or amend in this case, since the motion is on the floor, to reduce the 3% that Councillor Melbourne proposed, even further to 2%, 1%, or 0%, as you mentioned.
You have to take, you've got a motion to deal with on the floor, and if that motion fails, then I'll bring forward another motion.
So motions on the floor to reduce the number from current 4% down to 3%. Any other speakers? All in favor? 3. Can I see hands higher up, please? Sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Motion carries. So as it stands, it's at 3% now. Are there any other motions to change that number anymore before we move on? Councillor Di Lorenzo, you look a little confused. Question? None? All right.
I'm not sure how you got 3%.
So the budget as proposed automatically included a 4% increase. Councillor Melbourne proposed reducing the 4% down to 3%. That's what we passed. If any of the councillors would like to reduce it further, then I'll take the motion now for that, and Town Clerk can potentially explain it better.
Not explain it better, but maybe a little more, Mr. Chairman. That's the reason that they're broken out in 1% increments on the decision package. So Councillor Malboof and Council just voted to take one of those 1%. Is the next motion to take another one, and another one, and another one?
Mr. Clerk, the point is that the user fees in this town are going up 2.3% at minimum. This proposes to take them up an additional 4%, right, on top of that, which would be 6.3%. All right?
So let me jump in. There's a motion on the floor, so I'm looking for a motion first before we start debating.
I'll make a motion then.
Yes.
That in fact, it be zero. It not go any higher than
2.3%.
Than the user fee that was previously recommended.
Right. So that would be since one of the items have already passed. The motion then is to add back A6, A7, and A8. Any seconder? Mover, Councillor Best, seconder. Councillor Schellner, anything to add as a mover? Councillor Best? Anyone else? All in favor? Motion fails. All right, so moving on to A9, Canada Day support. Councillor Di Lorenzo, are you moving to add it back in? we're going to be at 12 or 13% at this rate. Any seconder? Yes. 8, 9. Councilor Melba, are you seconding?
Yeah, I'll second and get it on the floor, but I have a motion. That's why I thought we would be dealing with the motions before, because I have a motion dealing with that. But so I don't know if we keep this in there, and then when my motion comes forward, if that passes, then what happens with this?
Councilor Melba, are you talking about the community fund motion? Yeah, it seems like Canada is not there. What does that number add up to? Can we just quickly add it up? There's a motion that's going to come in later, and I thought Canada was in there as well, but I don't see it. So let me just quickly do some math. I see it in front of me. I'm just quickly adding it up. Just give me a second. 415. So that motion does not include Canada Day right now. We can deal with this at this moment. When we get to that motion, we can talk about it and we can come back to it if necessary. So Councilor Di Lorenzo, you moving it? Any seconder? Seeing none, we're going to move on. All right, A10.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
you
Councilor
have about 3 contrary motions regarding Canada Day. How does staff plan to handle them? Because if you approve one, you deny the others.
Yeah, I have them in order. So once we've approved one, the other ones won't go through, and if that fails, the other one goes through. So once we get to it, we'll talk about them all.
In other words, follow the bouncing ball. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, so A10. Seeing none, A11. All right, so that finishes the Section A. Before I move on, I think it would be useful to get the updated tally from staff. Glenn, do you need a few moments, or are you ready to go? All right, so can we get the town portion as well as the overall increase as it stands right now? And a blood pressure medicine as well.
Through the chair, the town portion right now is at 8.85%, and the overall with the region school board is at 3.86%.
Did everyone get that? So the town portion is at 8.85%. The overall, including the region and the education, is 3.86%. All right, so continuing on, let's move on to Section B, and to Councillor Melbo's previous question. Section B is how we've typically done it, which is these items are in the budget, and you'll move the motion to remove them. And if there's no motion, by default, they stay in the budget. So this is a little more traditional. And same deal, we'll go line by line. I have a number of motions that have already been circulated. When we get to those items, I will read those motions out, and some motions, like Councillor Best talked about, we'll have to move the bouncing ball, but that's just the way it is. We're good? All right. So B1, passive weed control program. It is in the budget. Motion would be to remove it. Anyone? B2. All right. B3. B4, B5, B6. Yes, sir.
I move that that be removed, but a question of staff. This runs all day?
Commissioner Cripps?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is a combination of the services along through the industrial corridor, so routes 1A, 1B, and 1C, as well as the early morning pickup service. So no, it does not run for the full day.
Councillor Malbove?
Okay, and I wish we had them in front of us, but would you have the ridership numbers for that route?
Through you, Mr. Chair, these are the numbers for 2018. However, the December numbers have not been finalized, so they've been estimated for December. Route 1 has a total ridership for the year of 35,000 plus.
Microphone, please, Councilor Malvo.
Yeah, when you're talking about Route 1, you're talking about the 401 Industrial Park.
That's correct.
35,000 for the year.
That's correct.
Do we have that broken down by rides per hour?
I don't have that information with me. I'm sorry.
Okay. I'll make the motion that this be taken out of the budget. If it's really in that much demand, maybe we should take a look at employers helping finance this, or wait till we get to all other alternatives. But I have a feeling.
Councilor Malvo, let me just get a seconder really quickly. Is there a seconder to the motion?
All right, then.
Right, seeing then. Sorry about that. B7. So this is where written motions come in. I have a motion that I'm going to read very carefully. There are a lot of items in the motion, and we will vote for every single item individually. So let me read out the motion, and this is not a bouncing ball, because there are other motions that negate this motion and so on and so forth. The motion is moved by Councilor Malbouf that the Milton Community Fund be redirected to fund the following programs that fit the original intent of the community fund and provide benefit to the entire community. I'm going to read the program and note that we'll vote on these individually. Number 1, Rotary Park outdoor pool, which costs $51,596, and it's B12 the package. The windrow removal program, which costs $40,820 and is B15 of the package. The outdoor summer play camp, $22,378, B18 of the package. Milfoil weed removal at Mill Pond, $59,415, B10 of the package. Downtown Milton Street Festival, $33,315, B17 of the package. The town's fee assistance program, $40,000, B16 of the package, and we might add the Canada Day to it, which seems like it didn't get added. And if all of them pass, then, and further that, the Community Fund Advisory Committee be disbanded. But if all of them don't pass, then I have a different motion by Councillor Clowett. I'm going to go through them one by one, don't worry about it, but we have a mover. I'm looking for a seconder first before we start talking about it. Councillor Ali will second it to bring it to the floor. Yes, Councillor Malbouf?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Reason to word it like this, and we've had discussion about this, this is a way to get $250,000 out of the operating budget while still financing the events and the programs that the majority of Miltonians use and need and support. So again, it's not, you know, we're going to cancel Canada Day, the street festival, the other issues, Rotary Park. No, but this is a way to finance those. And again, the community fund, as is structured now, has gone away from what it was initially started. So again, I would ask Council to support this so that we can support these events and still try to get down to a budget number that's acceptable.
Okay, so before I go around, just to mention, we're just talking about it all at once, but we're going to vote on them individually. Councillor Clowett.
Well, I appreciate the intent of the motion, and I know that there's been a lot of things discussed about the intent of what the community fund was for. Having sat on the Community Services Advisory Committee, which is now going to be the Community Fund Advisory Committee, if it stands, the fund was there, and it's funded from OLG revenue. So when we get the OLG revenue from the slots, basically the slot money, gets put into a reserve account, $250,000 of that gets allocated towards the community fund. And while there's a couple of items here, the two items that I do support for the community fund to possibly fund, and possibly the third, which being Canada Day, the Downtown Milton Street Festival, the town's fee assistance program. The rest of the items that are listed there, the Rotary Park, the Windrow Outdoor Summer Play Camp, and the Milfoil weed removal, those are operational items. And that has never been the intent of the community fund, is to fund operational items. And that means we're relying, it's the beginning part of relying on slot revenues to fund operational items. So long story short, 1 to 4 I would not support. 2 for 5 and 6 and possibly a 7th being Canada Day I would support. But that's the intent of the community fund was to support the community items. Everything in this budget supports the community at the whole, so anything else can be construed that way. But the OLG revenues, which funds the community fund, was never intended to fund operational items, and items 1 through 4 are operational. So again, I would not support the first 4, but I would support the 5th and the 6th and possibly the 7th.
Thank you. Councillor Di Lorenzo.
I echo a lot what Councillor Cluett just mentioned. The community fund helps many different groups in Milton, and we have a committee that goes through the requests every year, and that committee could choose to fund any item that gets applied for it. Even, I understand what Councillor Cluett saying is 1 or 2 of them, like the street festival or things like that, still partially meet the merit of what the original community fund was set up, but we'd still be then reducing the community fund. We'd be lowering that, and we'd be using part of the slots revenue down to pay for this, and we'd be lowering the amount left in the pot for community groups to apply for. And I know there are many groups in Milton, cadets organizations, different service groups that use that for optimal effect. The community group used to be the Community Services Advisory Committee, now the new Community Fund Committee, go through that, and they diligently look for which ones could be funded and which ones not. And I know there's much more applicants than $250,000 every year. It's not free money that anyone asking for it gets. So I understand we're looking for tax savings, but I'm not in support of reducing or eliminating the community fund and redirecting it to pay for operating costs or changing that dynamic.
Thank you. Next one, Councillor Best.
Yes, question to staff first. Is there an allocation out there right now that people are applying for? And if so, how much are they requesting?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there actually is a council report coming forward next council meeting dealing with the allocation. So what was listed in the public report was we had 33 groups apply for over $500,000 of community fund money.
Is that from last year's program, or is this part of what we're talking about today?
If council was to move forward with a reduction, it wouldn't affect what's coming forward on January 21st. It would have an impact on future.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Councillor Cluett and Di Lorenzo. The whole idea of the community fund was for community groups. I know the mayor, Councillor Malbouf, and Councillor Challoner, who were here when this fund was started. It was, for anyone that's not knows the knowledge, this is to replace the money that people had to raise at a bingo hall in the old smoke-filled rooms that a few of us had to endure, and basically free up their volunteer time to actually do community work rather than raise the money. And I commend the people on the CSAC committee or community fund, like Councillor Cluett. I served in 4 years, and what's really interesting is the volunteers in the committee were actually tougher on the applicants than the councillors were, because they knew how difficult it is to raise funds. So I don't want to dissuade it, because 95% of the slot money goes into our capital budget. To use the community fund for operating, as Councillor Cluett mentioned, is ridiculous and in a slippery slope. So I'm not in favor of this. All
right, Councillor Challoner.
Yeah, and I appreciate the comments that Councillor Cluett and Councillor Best have made, and just to sort of add very briefly on the history, the bingo halls that were used to raise a lot of the money that this community used for various programs essentially were going to go the way of the dodo bird almost overnight because of the establishment of the slots at Mohawk. And this was a salve for the community because they were going to be out of funds. They just simply wouldn't have them, and that was what was negotiated. You can't touch it. You know, frankly, using those funds for operating purposes is pretzel accounting. You know, the community's already witnessed what happens when the province of Ontario, through the stroke of a pen, changes what happens at Mohawk. That could very easily happen. That was always the thing that Mayor Krantz and I, you know, warned council. And this is, you know, Councillor Malbouf isn't the first councillor to sort of bring back a notion of spending these funds on operating costs. Can't do it. It's not, you know, a secure financial source. And this is part of the problem, guys, you also have with how you're paying for the hospital right now. How are you funding that? You're funding it with slot revenues. That's not sustainable. And that's going to have to be dealt with at some point. I just hope that the current government, trying to find $15 billion, doesn't look at Campbellville. I can't support the motion. And quite frankly, given the challenge that we face with this budget, these are pennies. We need to start looking for dollars, guys.
All right, Mayor Krantz.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to echo what's already been said, but I don't think that this motion is going too far, to be honest with you. Certainly not with my support, but I clearly understand what Councillor Malbouf has attempted to do to get the budget down to a reasonable increase, and I'm fully supportive of that. I still have the scars from supporting the OLG or the slots at Mohawk, and the angst that a lot of us went through when many, and I suggest Boy Scouts, Girl Guides, you know, some of the service clubs, etc., they were totally relying on the bingo for some of their resources. Full well knowing if the slots come in, it was likely going to impact them negatively. They knew that, and so did I. So that's when the Council of the Day suggested setting up this fund to offset it. And that was always the intent. Still is, and that's been alluded to, and at least in my opinion, I think it's been working reasonably well. Not only some of those groups that I just alluded to, but individuals that he or she's gone on to international competition to support them, provincial competition to support them, and even supporting other real good causes where it's been supported by Council's actions in the past. It was never, ever intended for operating. But I know that this is one way of getting the budget down, but I can't support that. But as an example, Mr. Chairman, I heard you say that you're going to deal with them individually, and I have no problem with that whatsoever. And I also heard Councillor Cluett suggest that he could support not 4 of them, but maybe 5 and 6. As an example, the downtown Milton Street Festival, there's nothing that would probably deny them for applying to the community fund to get some assistance. That's what that fund was set up for. And the last thing that I want to see, Mr. Chairman, is that fund not only discontinued but further reduced. But I don't want to see the Community Services Advisory Committee disbanded either. Because we quite often, not necessarily this council, but previous council got on record to have more community involvement. Because as I recall, and I stand corrected on my numbers, I think it's a 7-person committee, 2 members of council are on there, but the biggest majority of them are citizens that recommend where these funds go. It isn't us, the politicians, it's the citizens. So it's been working, in my opinion, reasonably well. Mr. Chairman, when they bring forward their recommendations, and again, I stand corrected on this, I don't think the councils over the years has changed it once. They've always adopted what the committee has recommended, because there's a lot of soul searching, a lot of homework goes into what they do. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ali.
Just wanted to clarify, I seconded the motion to bring it to floor. And I just wanted a clarification that when we're saying that we're disbanding the committee, we're not eliminating the program. We're just disbanding the committee?
No, if every single item passed and there'll be no money left for the committee to give out, then they will disband the committee, but it doesn't seem like any of the items will pass, so therefore that part of the motion will be dead on arrival.
Thank you.
Councillor Cluett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to add to what the Mayor said, because I've had the pleasure of being on the committee, the Community Services Advisory Committee, for the last 8 years, and what Councillor Best mentioned is that the citizens on that committee are probably harder on the applications than any of us ever would be. And a lot of thought goes into it, and I've seen the effort that goes in with the committee members and the members of the public, and I hope that many of them have applied to return back, return to the committee. So quite frankly, and again, I don't want to be seen like I'm trying to reduce the community fund. I'd love to be able to increase it. I'd love to be able to make it 500,000, or maybe, because I've seen the impact. We've talked about, you know, $500,000 in applications for a $250,000 fund, and members of the committee are upset that we can't fund everything because everything has its merits. So, like I said, we'll go on these items one by one, and hopefully we'll be able to continue on with the community fund.
Yeah, before I go to Councillor Malbov, I'd rather just very quickly go the items one by one, and if they don't pass, they don't pass.
Okay, if that's what we're going to do, I was going to withdraw the motion, but there may be support, because right now, if I withdraw the motion, then the support for Canada Day isn't there.
We can go back to it, but Councillor Best, Councillor Tessa Dirksen, before I go to you, is it okay to just start going one by one and move past this item?
I do have a question, though, just to the point that the mayor mentioned that there's nothing stopping the Downtown Milton Street Festival or the Canada Day Committee from applying for funds. I'm just wondering if we go through it one by one, like if it's open to them to apply anyhow, but we're voting on whether or not they would get funding automatically. That's what we would be voting on.
I'm going to let staff clarify it. That, and plus if you can also touch base on the Canada Day.
Sure. Through the chair. The DBIA is unable to apply for funding through the community fund because they're deemed to be part of the town. So that's the first one. Canada Day. I just want to highlight that what's in the package is basically a result of the Canada Day Committee, who physically deliver the event, providing us, the town, with notice that after this year they will no longer be volunteering to directly deliver the event. So whether or not council chose to keep this funding in the budget, it would not include staff to directly deliver this event.
Got it. So we'll talk about it when we talk about Canada Day, but just to speed things up, I'd rather just quickly go one by one. Yes, sir. Go.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up. I know that, because that's one of the questions I had in the back of my mind, whether or not the DBIA was qualified. Could the new community fund the community fund advisory committee, with consultation with staff, change the terms of reference to allow an exemption for the DBIA to apply, seeing as it is one of Milton's top events, highly rated in the province of Ontario, et cetera, et cetera. I know that there's strict terms of reference that allow who can apply to the community fund. Is that possible with a change of terms of reference with the new committee?
Sorry, through the chair, I just want to confirm that. So there's twofold, I guess. Number one is, are we able to use the fund? Would that meet the intended use of the slot funds to fund something that the town is part of the town? Number one, I guess terms of reference are always up for review, subject to council direction. Certainly, we would bring those terms of reference back to council for final approval. But I would just want to confirm whether or not, in fact, the intended use of the funds would meet that, what you just spoke of.
Okay.
Councillor Best and Di Lorenzo, and then let's really move on.
Again, I have my own motion, which council has for the last few days, basically requesting us to keep the status quo for both the Downtown Streets Festival and Canada Day, and requesting staff to come back with a report, reviewing, and I believe they are coming back in March, with where do we go from here, because I see these as operating costs, something that the town, and I agree with the mayor, we deliver one community event. The Canada Day Committee, most of them have been doing it for close to 20 years. They're not getting any younger, just like me. I found out the hard way right after Canada Day what could happen to you. So let's review this. It's not something that we need to do tonight. But basically, when the time comes, Mr. Chairman, put that motion to the floor, because it should not be coming the BIA. It would be like the library board applying for the community fund. It's a separate organization affiliated with the town, and why not open it up to engineering and other groups? Because the community fund is meant for community groups. That's exactly what the mayor pointed out, and we have a unique program for this because of those reasons, the history. So let's not jeopardize this whole area, because there's other motions coming. We don't have to deal with it now.
I withdraw my motion.
Done. Moving on. Just wanted to mention something. We skipped past the Canada Day in Section A, which was A9. And if we were to add back A9, I believe it was taking money from the tax rate stabilization reserve. I just wanted to give everyone a chance to go back to A9 and add it back if they so choose, because we skipped it in favor of this motion. Seeing none, back to Section B again. So we're at B7, which proposes reducing community fund available by 50%. Seeing none, B8 is obviously probably a no-go as well. Eventually we'll have to cut stuff, guys. B9. All right. This will be a long night. B10. B11. B12. Councillor Best.
Can I make my motion?
Yes, you may. Absolutely. I was going to anyway, but go for it.
Yeah, because, you know, as Councillor Malvo pointed out, this has been mentioned a few years, and we're not, you know, there's no plans here to close the leisure center or sports center pools, and to have this on this decision package almost every year after a number of councils spoke against it last year, now's the time to put it to bed.
So Councillor Best's motion is that the option of Rotary Park pool closure be excluded from all future decision packages. Seconded by Councillor Cluett. Councillor Di Lorenzo, Malvo, do you have comments, or were you seconding it? All right, all in favor? Carries. Councillor, Mayor Krantz.
Mr. Chairman, I'm in support of what's being advocated here, but the way that I understand it is forever. This council can only deal with this term, so let's be very clear for this term. For this term of council, because, you know, I don't want to interpret that it's forever, because it's not. You can do it for 4 years as a term of this council. Thank you.
I'll defer to staff for the actual non-political answer, but my understanding was that it was just not going to be a decision package, but it's still in the budget, so anyone could pull it out if they so choose. So Glenn. Mr. Clerk.
Correct.
What he said. Councillor Best?
Mr. Chairman, this is one of the reasons why staff asked councillors to circulate their questions, and that's why I had the option there for staff to wordsmith it, but obviously they chose not to. So I stand by my motion, and thank you everybody for support.
Your motion already carried. We're good. Unanimously, absolutely. Okay, moving on. B13. B14. Yes, Councillor Malvo.
Quick question. I'm not bringing any motions forward. I thought we did away with this gold drop-off once we extended the hours to 11 o'clock. So we've got 6 buses running in the evening. Why do we still need the drop-off service?
Commissioner Chris?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this is to meet some of the trains. Our transit timing doesn't interlock perfectly with the train schedule, so as a result, you'd have people waiting on the platform for maybe 45 minutes for the bus to come, so it's to service those customers.
All right, moving on. B15. I have a feeling we'll come back to a lot of these, by the way. Yeah. B15. 16. And I have a motion for B17. Well, there is a motion for B17. Moved by Councillor Best that the Town of Milton and the Downtown Milton BIA maintain the current status quo financial support to the Downtown Milton Street Festival for 2019. Seconder, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen. Any comment? All in favor? Carries. And second motion, also by Councillor Best, that staff review the funding and staffing for both the 2020 Downtown Milton Street Festival and Canada Day events and bring back a report to Council for consideration by the second quarter of 2019 to allow for the maximum planning time for these events. Any seconder? Seconder first. Councillor Di Lorenzo. Yes, Councillor Best.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for reading that out. As I mentioned earlier, you know, we're in a crux. We have, 4 months to go to the street festival. basically February to April, to organize things. I understand the staff provisions, and Councillor Tester-Dirks and myself will be going back to the BIA board about making some modifications on their part. But as we pointed out earlier, that we have a lot of senior staff involved with this program that could be handled by junior staff. Give you an example, the farmers market, all 20 of them are organized by a part-time summer student at $15 an hour. I think we can reduce our costs, and I've asked staff as part of their review to look at ways of cost savings and reducing. There is some other volunteers, and I mentioned to them that are quite willing to help. We just need staff liaison. As the executive director, before she went off on maternity leave on us, mentioned that we need staff assistance on this. And when you look at the actual cost, it works out to about 40 cents per person in the community. I think it's well worth it. We profile it in all our videos, our annual report, our economic development news, and it's something the town's known for. And I talked to our colleagues in Burlington and Oakville and their 5 BIAs, and they support them as well as their community festivals, because, give you an example, the Canada Day, they have to raise close to $90,000 a year. That's a lot of work, and appreciate the staff assistance there, but they need some sort of staff liaison. So if we are looking at community development, let's do it with a program that reviews both these, because I looked at the 90 events that staff are involved with. A lot of them don't need the town involvement. Let's concentrate on a few quality events town-wide rather than small ones that maybe the communications department can handle, or operations that really don't need a lot of staff involvement, because the organizers know what they're doing. They're on private property. Where we have public events on public property, let's see what we can do within reason.
Anyone else? Seeing none. Oh, sorry, Councillor Clewitt.
Yeah, just further to that, the street festival is now 11 years old, so it's something that's been ingrained in our community now. We've received a number of accolades from, as good as they are for the incredible turnout that's been there. Our 10th annual, there was, I think, the highest participation of Milton residents and outside residents. We've had wrestling matches in a downtown street festival with Tiger Fest. So if it were in danger of falling and not happening, just look what happened with the car show. Because during the Pan Am Games, we weren't allowed to have the classic car show in the downtown Milton, and the attendance the next year suffered. I can't imagine what would happen if we don't have the downtown street festival. If we miss it this year, just because of, as Councillor Best mentioned, about 40 cents per person. So I was part of the advisory committee back in 2000 and the 150th anniversary committee, as well as many other councils that were on the table to come up with the street festival. It'd be a shame to see it go.
Anyone else? Councillor Melville?
Just for clarification, I was not against the street festival or the Canada Day. It was just how do we fund it. So I'm in support of this motion.
Seeing none, all in favor? Carries unanimously. All right, B18. And last, B19. Councillor Challoner?
Yeah, I think there was a sense of, in the report, how well subscribed this was. We could probably bring the person in a cab who actually uses it to be cheaper than what we're currently paying. There's got to be a better way to do this, if it's even needed at all.
Are you moving to remove it?
My motion is to get rid of it.
All right, seconder, Councillor Melbouf. Councillor Clewitt.
Question of staff. I know that we were looking at different options to provide the streaming of this. I know many municipalities, Oakville utilizes the YouTube service very well. They're able to preload in the notifications for their upcoming meetings, and it's run very well. I know there's some technical issues, maybe from an equipment point of view, but I don't want the public not being able to see what goes on, especially live. Like this is, and again, and again, $8,500, 4 cents, and you know what? I'll be more than happy to add to that as well. But staff, I know, is looking at it. If this was removed from the budget, will we suddenly go dark? Is my quick question.
All right, if I can just go back to staff, Frank.
So through you, Mr. Chair, if we eliminate the streaming, effectively we'll go dark. You won't have any streaming. We do have online services, but we do not have a system that would take that and make it available for any online recording, archiving, or showing it through web streaming.
Councillor Clwyd?
If we go dark, I can't support it.
Councillor Best?
Question's been answered.
Councillor Di Lorenzo?
From an accountability and
question for staff or just comments? You're good. Thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
From an accountability and a transparency factor, I think we need to leave it in there. I know many residents go look at the archives because they want to see what was discussed after, and I know some do it live. I understand out of 100,000 or 110,000 population, it's a small portion, but it's the portion of people who are involved and active and want to hold council accountable to our actions and in discussions. And I think removing that reduces our accountability and reduces the transparency. So out of the $8,500, I would like to keep that in.
Councillor Malbov.
Yeah, just a quick question. I'm not a techie like most of the councillors are. Do we know how many, do you call them hits? How many people watch it? Do we have any indication how many people actually watch it? Or is it the number, I think the majority of the hits are the members of council watching themselves. So.
Back to staff. Okay, town clerk's taking a look at it. Once we get the number, we'll go around. Councillor Tessa-Dirksen, we'll come back to that.
Thank you. Yeah, I also had a bit of a question for staff, and I'm not much of a techie. Would there be a difference in cost if it was not live? Like, could it be recorded and then posted for people to watch? I mean, people do have the option of being here if they want to see it happen live, for the most part. And I'm just wondering if there would be a cost savings. I know the dollar amounts are small, but I mean, they're still dollars. Thanks.
So just looking at the decision package, roughly there were 679 views on the web page during the live stream last year. 679 people viewing it. That would include potentially staff. It also includes, let's say, archiving. So it's archived. You want to go back and review it. So it may not be live streams, and maybe just even reviewing of archives.
Does that answer the question, Councillor Malbov? Councillor Tessa-Dirksen's question was, does the cost change if we don't stream it live and only archive it?
So in order to, the nice part of the package that we have is they not only stream it, but they also archive it for us. So if we remove the streaming component, then we have to hire staff or find a way with staff, put that burden on them to figure out exactly the mechanisms to archive the data, save it, store it, and there's all soft costs and hard costs associated with that as well. So I think in the end, if I had to give you, in my humble opinion, it's almost a wash between the two.
Before we go on, Councillor, any other question for Frank, so he doesn't have to keep coming back up? Going twice, seeing none, thank you very much, sir. Next I have Councillor Best, Councillor Ali, sorry, and then Councillor Best.
Question's been answered.
Thank you.
Just a comment. I agree with Councillor Di Lorenzo. He raises a very good point that there's an accountability, transparency in public service that we cannot do away with. So for that reason, I will not support this.
Anyone else? Councillor Clwyd.
I'll just give you, for instance, what if the federal government decided to say, hey, we're going to turn the cameras off during question period? What happens if they turn the camera? And I can probably say not a lot of people outside of myself watch CPAC, but I watch it very occasionally. But what happens if the House of Commons went dark, or Queen's Park, with all the things that are going on, went dark? Imagine the outcry. This is $8,500.
Councillor Challenor?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the decision would be made by the federal government to do that. So, you know, let's remember that in most municipalities across this country, they don't have this service. We have a free press. There's more people who read the paper every week about what we do than look at this over a year, right? I mean, let's get real here. You've also got radio coverage, you've got television coverage. It's a canard to suggest that we're limiting any kind of freedom or transparency. That's just nonsense. you know, my point is there has to be a more efficient way to do this that costs less money for such poor viewership. If this was a business decision to be made like that, there's no return. 679 views in a year. Councillor Malboof may be right about who's actually watching it.
All right, seeing no other comments, all in favor of removing this item from the budget? 2, 3, 4, motion fails. All right, now we have a number of other motions that we'll be going through. And oh yeah, I lost my page. There we go. All right, the first motion I have is moved by Councillor Tessa Dirksen, seconded by Councillor Di Lorenzo, that the recently announced increase of $36,795 in the town's share of the annual provincial gas tax, it's misspelled B, applies to the 2019 operating budget as a funding source for the operating costs of the transit program. It's all clear. Councillor Best?
Yeah, question to staff. Is this something that staff have had a chance to review?
Through the chair, yes. We just got this announcement this week, so we've identified it for council's consideration tonight.
Okay, that's fine.
Councillor Malbo?
How much of the current gas tax goes to transit?
The provincial gas tax is required to go to transit-oriented programs, so it's 100%.
All right, seeing nothing else, all in favor? Motion carried. By witness. Next one, moved by Councillor Malboof, that the operating, and I'm going to read it slowly, that the operating budget for the mayor and council be reduced by a net amount of $48,239, reflecting a reduction in participation rates in the available benefits program and the inclusion of an expense line of $1,200 per town councillor for a total of $4,800. Councillor Best?
Just a question where those numbers came from in terms of...
Let me get a mover really quickly, and then we can talk about that. Councillor Di Lorenzo, seconder. Councillor Best.
Yeah, I just want to find out where those numbers are coming from and what benefits are we talking about. Are we looking at a pay cut for councillors?
Good question. Glenn?
Through the Q&A document circulated in December, we identified that after the time of budget setting when the document was created, it was around the time of the election, so the entire council budget was built up, not knowing specifics as to the individuals and the chairs. Now that we've been through the first pay cycle, we have a better line of sight on the different benefits where there's ability to opt in and opt out or eligibility. With that number in hand, we know that there's opportunity for a total savings just over $50,000 without, just based on basically those benefits and where councillors have chosen to opt in or out.
Okay, I just want to clarify. So we're voting on opting in and opting out again?
We're not going to answer that question. So I actually, my apologies, I jumped the gun to the second half of the motion. And further, that staff be directed to present to council a proposed councillor expense policy no later than the second quarter of 2019. And I believe that would only be for town councillors because there's nothing for regional councillors. He's nodding yes. Councillor Ali.
So the opting in and out is about the benefits?
Glenn.
Correct. That's a decision each councillor makes with respect to the different benefit programs offered.
So because of that, we have a surplus?
Correct. The budget assumed that everyone would opt in, so the town would have to contribute for the town share of each of those programs.
And so the motion is that we use that surplus?
The motion is a combination of returning that surplus to reduce the tax rate, except for the portion that's related to the expenses that are mentioned in it.
Thank you.
Councillor Malboof?
Yeah, very briefly, I'm sure everybody understands. This is not taking money away. It's just a surplus that's in the budget. Let's remove it. The purpose for the $1,200 for the local councillors was because, because of federal legislation, the members of council have lost their 1/3, which was to compensate for expenses. The reason placing it just for local councillors, because we as regional councillors have an office budget, and there's no need for have both of them. So that's why it's just for the local councillors.
Councillor Tessa-Dirksen.
So the $1,200 per year that is available for a local councillor to use in their expense account is optional. They don't have to use it's.
That is correct. And the second part of the motion is, I'm going to read it once again, and further that staff be directed to present to council a proposed councillor expense policy no later than the second quarter of 2019. So I believe that's when we'll have the answers. Councillor Di Lorenzo.
Yes, I'm supportive in this with the understanding that there will be an expense policy coming back to town council, so we can determine exactly how that can be used or not used. Some councillors may decide not to use it, but I would like us to publicly say how that money could be used, so it's transparent, so it's not just an additional $1,200 that goes into someone's pocket. It should be public, and I'm hoping that the receipts and how it's spent, that all becomes transparent information to everyone.
Seeing no one else, all in favor? Motion carries. Next up, Councillor Melbouf, moved by Councillor Melbouf that service available at the First Ontario Arts Centre Milton box office be reduced, resulting in savings of $25,000. Seconder? Councillor Best? Any comment? All in favor? Motion carries. I'm sorry, I thought you were voting already ahead of my Councillor Challoner.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's important to understand exactly what we're voting on. None of this information is in the package, so, you know, I know there has been some angst expressed about the cost of these various facilities and how they're staffed, but I think it's important that before we make a decision like this, we understand what is the implication and how can we provide service.
Absolutely. Councillor Melbouf?
Yeah, just for clarification, you know, spoken with staff, this is an amount that staff came back with that said they could live with right now, and it's basically the box office. The vast majority, I suspect, of ticket sales are online now. Even I've done it online, so it can be done. So again, it's only, so it's just, you know, we're looking at $25,000 savings, but I know I've been talking to staff and the commissioner, and we'll be looking at other savings in that area, but this is a start in the right direction.
Any comment? Any comment from staff on that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Councillor Melbouf and I have had some conversations. So roughly 50% register online and 50% register in person. So in talking with staff, we felt we could reduce by 25%, start doing some change management, and obviously we're really looking at this service. A recommendation to council would be through the core service delivery review on some alternatives, because obviously there is some customer service education as well, which is why we proposed a $25,000 reduction.
Councillor Di Lorenzo.
More of a question. So could that reduction be what, through hours of the box office is open, or what possibilities is related to that? I don't really understand.
It's in labor. So yes, operating hours.
And will that be, so if we approve this as it is, will there be like a future report saying what the hour change is going to be, or just, it will just happen?
We could certainly let council know through a memo, but there was no future report. This would be the direction. If there was a $25,000 reduction, staff would review when we feel the the hours that would best serve our customer would operate, and that's what we would do, similar to what we do in our rec centers when we modify the staffing there as well.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All in favor? Motion carries. Moved by Councillor Melbouf that the service level change for the Honor Guard / Color Party Pipe and Drum Band, including the related reserve funding, be removed from the 2019 budget. Seconder? Any seconder? Councillor Cluitt's a seconder. Got it. So Councillor Melbouf, any comment?
Very simply, as I mentioned earlier, we have other priorities. Okay? I mean, we were looking at $8,000 on the webcam. So, you know, for me, this is not a priority, and I think it'd be sending the wrong message out there. So I would ask council support that let's get back to our priorities.
Councillor Cluitt.
Just so everybody is following the bouncing ball, because again, I was trying to figure, I don't recall, can we have a page number of where this is included?
Yeah, I was going to ask that as well. Is it a page number, Councillor Malboof? Or staff, or anybody else?
Or staff, yeah.
Yes, Glenn.
It is page 147.
Even though they may not be watching online, but people are watching here and have their budget books here, so we can.
So while Councillor Clute, you're looking at it, are you okay if I go to Councillor Di Lorenzo for his question and come back to you?
Absolutely.
Councillor Di Lorenzo.
That was my question.
Got it. So while that's happening, I did have a question. What's the total budget for the operating budget for the fire department right now, as it stands?
The proposed 2019 for fire is $11,044,000.
And how much will this item reduce that budget by?
Because of the one-time nature of it, we didn't include it into the tax base, which is why you see the reference to the reserve funding. It would have been a one-time funding source for the cost.
But what is the actual amount?
It's a $10,000 program that's in here.
So, but the other $11 million budget will still stay intact. Got it.
No, I'm heartened by the comments that are in the on that page 147 that said that they. Milton Fire Department will endeavor to identify sponsorship opportunities or undertake financial fundraising in support of the initiative. So we'll move forward with this.
Councillor Di Lorenzo, then Councillor Malboof.
So I'm not in favor of cutting this. I mean, it does mention that the fire department's also looking to, complement the town's contribution. But if we eliminate the town's contribution, then we're allowing the fire department to either do everything, the entire contribution, or is it eliminating it altogether? I believe very much that if you take care of your employees and staff, they're going to take care of the business, and I don't think this is something that should be cut. The Milton Fire Department do a very important job, and I don't think having an honor guard or drum bands, I'd be fine eliminating, we eliminated our dinner budget or eliminated other things from councillor perks, but eliminating the fire department honor guard, I think that's nitpicking, and I would like to leave that in.
Councillor Malboof.
Again, this is not about the $10,000, what the amount is. It's what the perception out there is. Here we are trying to find $5,000 here, $20,000 here. I don't believe this is a necessity in serving our public. I think, again, we have to prioritize. Right now, I'm looking at, we're somewhere around 7.5. Okay, so
no, we're probably closer to 9%.
I think we're going up. So again, it's got nothing to do with the 10,000. It's got nothing to do with my position with the fire department and everything else. I believe there's things the fire department needs that they could spend $10,000 on more than equipment for a pipe band. So again, we have to get back to prioritizing where our money goes, and I don't believe this is a priority.
Councillor Tessa Dirksen.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with Councillor Malboof. I don't think there's any question that we hold members of the fire department the utmost esteemed respect for the work they do in the community. Who doesn't love bagpipes? I mean, we would, in a perfect world, we could fund this. In maybe a better budget year, we could fund this. But I think the members of the fire department would agree that there are priorities that we need to make some tough decisions, and this, I think, is one of them, unfortunately.
I concur. Actually, I wanted to stay neutral and just facilitate. I should have jumped in first. This is not a tough decision at all. This is not a tough decision, guys. Come on, we got to cut something. Any other comments? All in favor? All opposed? Motion carried. Trying to make sure. All right, next. Moved by Councillor Malboof that $31,896 be added to the budget to maintain the crossing guards at 3 signalized intersections. Any seconder? Councillor Ali. Sorry, 3 hands went up at the same time. Councillor Malboof.
Yeah, very briefly, I think I have support of the majority of council on this issue. Those 3 intersections right now are 3 of the busiest intersections we have. They're 4 lanes. There's schools in there. Again, it's prioritizing, you know, what do our taxpayers want us to spend money on? I think the protection of our children is one of those high priorities, and I can't support taking away crossing guards. The backlash that we would get from the parents and the teachers and the schools in those areas would beat the dandelion issue immensely. So again, I would ask council support on this. And
Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with Councillor Malbouf's motion, and I actually would like to add an amendment to include another intersection, which is the Farmstead and Louis Saint Laurent intersection in Ward 4 community of Milton. This is a fairly new intersection, and with the development of new residences as well as schools in the area, it only makes sense for us to be proactive and add crossing guards. I frequent that intersection daily, and I see it turning into a major pain point for the Ward 4 community of Milton.
So let me get a seconder first to the amendment. Councillor Cluett. Councillor Bestowit. Go on, sorry.
That's it, thank you.
All right, I have Councillor Cluett and Councillor Best.
Okay, quickly, for the benefit of the public, the 3 intersections, can staff identify the 3 intersections that we're talking about? Because I know there are some that are signalized, some that have the walkway with the striped lines, but I just want to make sure that the public is aware of the 3, and now the 4th, because to add Farmstead and Darien. And to speak at that, I know Councillor Best and I worked very hard to get crossing guard and a signal at Darien Sauvé for the folks and the kids over at Irma Colson. Seeing some raw video of how, and I guess this is a public service announcement to the people, drive better. Some of the things that we saw in this video were actually incredible and scary at the same time, seeing how cars were going in between kids crossing the street. Thankfully, we did get a crossing guard there at that location, but just to stress the importance, especially in Farmstead and Derry being very new, and there's more development happening. There's construction trucks, there's everything. So I think we do need as much opportunity to control the traffic for our students at that point.
Councillor Cluett, staff's looking up intersections, so I'll go to Councillor Best and go back to staff.
Yeah, same comments as both councillors. I echo it, because you look at these areas, not only they're very busy 4-lane intersections, they also have construction which will be going on for years. You know, just as Councillor Malbouf mentioned, you look at Main and Harris, you got Bishop Redding that may or may not be going through construction. You've got new development right at the corner there, plus Yard on Main, plus more, you know, and that basically that is a main truck route for any deliveries into the Superstore Plaza, as well as other condos that may or may not be going up, depending on what staff present to us the next few months.
So I'll go to Glenn first and come back to Councillor Malbouf.
Sure. There's a service level change form on this on page 293. The 3 intersections are Ontario Street and Laurier Avenue, Main Street and Pearson Way / Harris Boulevard, and Dairy Road and Sauvé Street.
Councillor Ali, do you want to repeat the 4th intersection, please?
Yes, it is the intersection of Farmstead Drive and Louis Saint Laurent.
And just so we're clear, the amount, oh goodness, I left the page. Mr. Clerk, what is the total amount with the 4th intersection? It's $43,559. Councillor Malbouf.
yeah, I'll be supporting the amendment. I wasn't aware of that corner, but the same concerns of the other 3, so I'll be supporting the amendment.
Councillor Challoner.
In principle, I'm supportive of what Councillor Ali is proposing, but I think there needs to be a little bit of better understanding as to what is going on in that intersection. And I would prefer if there was a friendly amendment along the lines of, in principle, council supports it subject to a review by staff, because you may put yourself in a difficult precedent when you find out that maybe it doesn't meet warrants. You hope it does. You better be really clear. Common sense, guys.
So let's go to Commissioner Cripps.
Through you, Mr. Chair, all 4 of those intersections have been reviewed by staff, and in our opinion, the crossing guards are not warranted under the current system. We will be bringing forward the revised policy sometime in the, I was going to say new year, sometime this year, probably Q1 or Q2, to rethink or revamp our whole crossing guard program. I'm not saying that their status would change as part of that policy, but I just wanted to know that council to know that the policy will be coming forward.
Okay, Councillor Chalmers, you have the floor.
I'm hoping that the councillors that move that motion will accept the amendment. I think it's fairly clear that it needs to be.
Councillor Tessa-Dirksen.
That was basically my question. In principle, I also agree with having crossing guards at dangerous intersections to protect children, but I understand there's some kind of process to review whether or not it's warranted, because otherwise we'll have people coming forward asking for crossing guards at every intersection. Thank you.
Councillor Best.
Just on that, I agree with the amendment. I would certainly second that friendly amendment. And also, I'm glad to see staff are, because, all you have to do is stand at the intersections, and I agree with Councillor Cluett. The warrants may say one thing. You just look at the driver behavior and talk to the police. They are getting scared. The amount of people going, almost double the speed limit in this area. So I request to do that. And also, when staff are going over this, talk to the school board, because a lot of people, even some former councillors are no longer here, thought the school board paid for these crossing guards, not the town. And if we can also get some cost sharing from them, I'd really appreciate it.
I have some comments after we all done. Councillor Melbu.
Again, very briefly, not to belay the issue, but again, we all seen the traffic, the right-hand turn, the speeding, the aggressive driving. Those are the complaints we're hearing. And again, in principle, let staff look at it, but for now I'm saying, and we want to talk about a political budget, political item, cut the crossing guards, okay, with the parents and the kids. So again, I would ask council support for the motion as amended.
Anyone else? All right, just a quick comment. So for the record, when the original crossing guards were added as signalized intersection, I might have voted against it. I was against it, mostly because staff recommendation was that the signal is supposed to create a gap. Now, when I looked at the Louis Laurent Farmstead intersection, a lot of residents had complained about, what turned out is, which is something I didn't wrap my mind around, is right turn lane. Because in Ontario, you're allowed to turn right on red, almost no one stops. Like, it's not, they don't even slow down sometimes. They'll move as fast as the car can move, which creates a very dangerous situation. So I do agree that we have to have crossing guard. And then when staff reviews the policy, we might be able to redebate it and maybe remove it next year if it's not necessary, but we shouldn't remove it while we're removing the policy. That's my 2 cents. So the motion's on the floor as amended. Well, amendments on the floor. All in favor? Motion carries. We're good with all 4. Next, glasses off. Moved by Councillor Best that staff undertake consultation with stakeholders regarding the municipal accommodation tax funding tool that is available for municipalities and report back to council by the second quarter of 2019. Seconder, Councillor Tessa-Dirksen. Councillor Best.
Yes, thank you, and thank staff for undertaking this discussion. I've talked to councillors from other municipalities such as Niagara Falls, Toronto, Ottawa, and Oakville. This is something that basically what these municipalities are doing is like a hotel or Airbnb tax, and which also needs some regulation, but basically to fund tourism promotion and promotion in the community. So it basically would be like a slots fund. It would basically go, and the money raised goes back into promoting the community, and only promoting the community, not as a general revenue. So I'd ask for council support.
Any other comment? Makes sense to me. All in favor? Motion carries. That's it for our written motions. Before we go on the floor, let's take a couple of minute break so staff can come up with an updated number. Let's take a break anyway. Thank you. All right, members of council, let's make our way back to our chairs, please. Councilors? So councilors, take 30 seconds to come back so we can get started. All right, so we have the numbers. So Glenn, do you want to remind us what is the overall, what is the town portion standing at right now, as well as the overall rate?
Sure. Okay. So as we stand, the town portion is 8.74%, which translates to $21.17 per $100,000 of residential assessment. The combined with region and school board is at 3.82%, which is $26.71 per $100,000 of assessment.
Just a quick question. What is the average assessment in Milton? Because I don't know what that, what is the average assessment in Milton right now?
Yeah, so the average in the single detached category is in 2018, $590,787.
So looking at the assessment per 100,000 on town's portion, what does that translate to for an average household based on the average assessment?
Just 1 second here, I've got that. It is $125 for the town portion per year and $157 combined with the region.
It's about $10 a month and $12 a month?
10 and 13.
10 and 15 a month?
10 and 13.
10 and 13 a month.
Per month, yeah.
Okay, councillors, so you heard it. I don't have any other motion, so I'm going to put it to a vote if no other motion comes in. Councillor Melbo, seems like you want to say something.
Yep. As I said 2.5 hours ago, I suspect that we're going to spend a lot of time coming around, and so we spent 2.5 hours to cut 1% from the budget. For us to get down to the 3.5 to 3.5 that the mayor and I believe the majority of council is looking for, it'll take us about 12 hours. Okay? And I don't see where we're going to find it. So I'm prepared to put a motion on the floor that council rejects this budget as is and send it back to staff to look at it, to come back with a budget in the range between 2.5 to 3.5. Some of the things we can look at, you know, I know, I think we've sent the message to staff what council would support and not support as far as what's in this budget. But I can't see us going to the public with an 8.7% tax increase when inflation's running at 2.5. So again, I put my motion on the floor that we reject the budget as is, send it back to staff to take a look at. And, you know, I've got some ideas of where they could look at that's not in here.
Okay, Councillor Challenor is seconding the motion.
I'll second the motion, but I'll be very specific that it be set at 3%. I have no problem with what council has already approved as being part of that package, obviously. But I think that there's a number of things that staff have to look at doing and being creative about. As I indicated, I think that there's a lot of money that's locked up in some programs like transit, and if we fast-tracked how we looked at transit, that would enable us to get down to the number this year. If you were able to start, for example, a pilot hybrid program with the 3 programs that were identified by staff, that's a minimum of $600,000 if you started in the spring. The other issue that has to be looked at is, and it's missing from the budget, and it's the elephant in the room, and that is staffing. And the grid, which I'm not familiar with, and I mentioned that to the CAO when we spoke some time ago. I'm glad to see that we still have pay for performance. Let me just sort of briefly talk about that. Pay for performance was instituted. Again, it was an idea that, that Councillor Hunter came forward with in the mid-90s when we had some difficult issues, quite frankly, not dissimilar to what we have today, where we weren't the highest percentile payer in the province of Ontario, and we had an issue in terms of encouraging, incentivizing our staff. Good staff have always had good staff, but, you know, were we recognizing the best and encouraging others to achieve? And so pay for performance was developed. The idea being that you can't have your grid increasing every year. You simply can't, because what happens is you become unaffordable. And do you really want to be at the top of the pay scale in terms of municipality, or you want to be somewhere in the middle? And I know, you know, in my experience outside of government, you typically want to be 65th percentile, roughly. And some businesses are well below that. But what you want to do is encourage people to do their best, and that's why pay for performance is a great product. And I don't know, you know, I've been away since 2006. I don't know how well it has worked here. I haven't read any HR reports on its effectiveness and whether or not town staff here view it that way. But when you look at, you know, where do we spend most of our money? Most of our money is spent in staffing. We're a service organization. We don't produce a product. And so there's an opportunity there, along with attrition and a review of what we absolutely need in 2019 through the core services review. And I acknowledge to everybody here that, again, this is a bit of the cart before the horse. But I think we all understand, you know, why we're here tonight and how we got here. This is neglect. I mean, this budget process has been neglected for years. We should never have been put in this position. The guys around this table aren't to blame, and staff aren't to blame. Staff were looking for direction and didn't get it, and that's why you have this budget. So there are some tough decisions that need to be made. And, you know, where do we spend most of our money? And how can we do it in the most effective, humane way in 2019, and in combination with core services, get back to what is important? And I honestly was pleased by what I saw around the table for the most part tonight in terms of what people said about some of the services that were up for consideration. They understood that they're core, and they are. And so I fully support what Councillor Malbouf is saying. I think the number is 3. They should come back to us with what are the impacts of that, as they always have. But that to me is the point we're at today. I don't think that we can get to that number, or 4, or even 5 any other way. There's not enough information here for anybody to understand what we need to do.
Before we go to councillors, before we go to Mayor, I'm sure Town CEO would have a comment. Before that, just a quick question. When is our, you had mentioned, Councillor Chalmers had mentioned the core services review. Is that something that's scheduled? And if so, then when?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the core service delivery review report is actually on the January 21st agenda. It is subject to capital budget approval. It's approximately a 6-month process, and in that report, we are proposing a phased approach. So it should be, it is in your council packages, and I actually emailed out to everybody on Friday. So if you've got any questions, certainly happy to answer those throughout the week.
So with that, Mr. CEO, is there any, do you need direction from council, or where are we at right now?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, the debate around the table, and I very much appreciate the comments from individual councillors with respect to staff. It's been a difficult process for staff to this point, and obviously council is struggling just the same amount of staff. We would like, if that motion was to carry, we would like at least some indication or a hint in terms of what we should be looking at, because frankly, we've spent a lot of time, a lot of effort going through and identifying what we believe to be apolitical options. Obviously, judging by council's reaction tonight, that doesn't put us in any better position. So we would, if at all possible, before we adjourn tonight, get some indication or hints in terms of what they would like us to look at. It's very difficult, as Councillor Challoner has indicated, it's almost a cart before the horse, because the core service delivery review would give us that position in terms of what services are making money, what services aren't making money, what services are qualitative from a community aspect. I believe Councillor Tesser-Dirksen said it right. We have to also take in consideration not only the quantitative aspects, but the qualitative aspect of this budget. So we appreciate all the comments being made around the table. I've also said we've accommodated 20 years of growth. We've been well managed, well financed. From a staffing point of view, we've done the best we can. We are looking at 65% percentile in comparison to other communities. Staff is our best and biggest asset, correct. And I just wouldn't want the message going back to staff that although we value them, we can't be competitive in terms of salaries. And right now we are losing key personnel to bigger municipalities that they essentially have to do half the work. So we have a very dedicated staff. I want the message to go out that we are very much appreciative of staff. They're our biggest asset. If there could be other areas, direction, other hints given, we would be very appreciative of that this evening.
Let's go to Glenn first, and we'll go to Councillor Malbo.
Just one comment, just to hopefully help inform the conversation, to give a sense of the dollar magnitude, to go from where we're currently at to a 3%. So when we take it back and look for options, we would need $3.37 million to get the budget to that target.
All right, so I have a long list of speakers, so I'll start with Councillor Best.
Yes, I thank Councillor Challoner for his comments, and I agree with most of them and the CAO's comments. I'm not looking at 3.3 million because we're in the strange position. If you look at our demographics over the last 5 years, town's grown by 30%, almost 6% a year. That's 3 times the rate of any other municipality in this area. And that's the problem, as we've heard from development charges, residential growth does not pay for itself. The problem I'm also facing, as I put on your desk tonight, is our building permits, from last year, this year, basically dropped by over $1 million. So that's compounding the situation, that we're also getting less revenue in because we're not getting the right mix of industrial, commercial to residential. So what I'm looking at is possibly a combination of issues, basically, having a human relations or resources workshop so we can get these kind of answers that Councillor Challoner has raised, and looking at the levels of management and where we need to be and not to. In terms of raising $3 million, I think we're going to have some difficulty there, but I'd like to, basically get down the net down to about 2.5 to 3. Rather than in the gross, because we are a growing community, as we mentioned at the region. We're the community that is driving the growth in this region. We're not getting the revenue from it, and that's why I raised about the hotel tax. If there's any other provisions that staff can find to increasing revenue without hitting the existing taxpayers, or in the situation we have, looking at all aspects. We've set some direction tonight where we don't want to cut and where we do want to cut. What I'd like to highlight is look in the departments what is essential and what isn't, because that's one thing I looked at when my 11 motions is what is necessary. And I appreciate the support that council gave me, and also the motions that have been made around this table of focusing on serving our residents. But we also have to look at the efficiencies, and I agree with Councillor Challoner's motion.
Thank you. Before I go to speakers list, since you mentioned net to 3%, question to staff, what does that mean in dollar per 100,000 assessment, as well as in the average assessment, the difference between where we are and the 3% net?
And just so I'm clear, 3%, you're talking 3% net on the town line only, or are you talking by net looking at the full picture?
Overall, because this is one of the difficulties, as Councillor Challoner mentioned about putting the cart before the horse. This may be one of those years that we have to look at as, okay, we do have some essential programs we have to do, but I'm looking at, even though we're 8.74, the net to everybody is 3.8. I'm looking into getting down to, you know, to 2.5 to 3 to get the inflation rate. But we have to review these other issues, the core services review, where we're going in terms of official plan, in terms of these long-term. That's part of the reason why I had so many capital budget items. You know, they may not seem much right now, but they're in the tens of millions of dollars.
So through the chair, just to put some context to that, so to get the combined town, region, local down to a 3% would be about $1.4 million from where we currently are. That would make the impact to the household $20.92. That's everything with town, region in it. So looking at the total, it would be about $123 a year then to the household, all in for all services.
Mr. Chairman, that's where I'm aiming. I know other councillors may have other different goals, but I think, you know, taking that direction to staff and saying, okay, what is essential and what isn't, bring it back to council, and council can decide on what direction, because I understand the dilemma staff are facing. We've made some decisions here tonight. Hopefully the staff can come back in a few weeks, we can come up with a decision.
Okay, so just one more follow-up question with Councillor Best, and I apologize, I'm not trying to jump in, I'm just trying to clarify the points. So get to net 3% from where we are right now. We are net 3.82%. What's the dollar amount that we have to reduce to get to net 3% from 3.82%?
It's approximately 1.4 million.
All right, so I'm going to go through my speakers list, and if you can look at the budget and come up with items that you'd like to cut to get to that 1.4, that would be appreciated by staff, I'm sure. Councillor Best, anything further? Councillor Tessa-Dirksen?
Thank you. When I indicated that I wanted to speak, it was a knee-jerk reaction to the $3.7 million figure that I was given, $3.37 million. Is that realistic? Like, can that even be achieved? I mean, again, like, it's a naive question, I suppose, in some aspects, but realistically, what are we going to cut here? Like, what is there to cut that we can achieve that kind of decrease? And it's kind of an open-ended question. Thanks.
Glenn, you want to take that?
Sure. We are talking service levels at that point. You know, in order to, because our starting point really was going back to the start of the pressures of current service levels, it was up in the 12% range. By not including any new tax-funded staff, for example, we know that's not a long-term sustainable solution, potentially, subject to things like service review. But the reports to date from KPMG have indicated we already have a shortfall there. We know we're not fully addressing the asset management plan needs. So even for current services, there's still a way to go in terms of the long-term sustainability. To go from the items, and a lot of the items you see in the blue pages came from staff's review and identifying what we thought were the discretionary services that provided a bit more of an opportunity. Really to come up with more options from there, we're going to be going back to what we deemed as either more towards the core service or things that we heard through things like budget surveys where roads, for example, always rank really high, so we weren't really focusing on that to align with what we hear through the feedback. So we're talking about going into those kinds of services and talking service reductions, you know, short of any findings that say there's a different, more efficient way. But just at a high level, when you look at the services we provide and where our tax funding is relative to comparables that provide the same services, we know we're at a significant lower starting point. So that's why I kind of narrow it down to service level discussions.
Councillor Tessa-Dirksen.
Thank you, and I guess therein lies my concern, and getting back to my initial comment when we started here, is this going to mean we're under-investing in places where we should be putting money? Are we putting ourselves at financial risk for the future? I think we have to be really careful where we're taking this $3.37 million from, and I'm sure we're all aware of that. I don't really need to say it. Thank you.
Is that a rhetorical question, or would you want directed to staff?
Well, if staff have anything to say, I'd be welcome to hear it.
And Glenn, where are we compared to comparable municipalities?
So if you look, our current tax rate equates to $242. To move up to just the average of our neighboring municipalities, we would need to go up by 50% to $360 to get in line with where their average is. So,
Councillor.
Thank you. I'll stop there.
Councillor Clewett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Best brought up the, because we're all talking numbers, and I think the overall number on the tax bill is the most important number for our taxpayers, because that's the number that they actually write the check for. To get to that 3% from a local standpoint, the $3.37 million is, I think, they can go away for a month or two, and I don't think they're going to come to that realization. I like the idea from Councillor Best as well. If we can target that 3% overall rate, 3% overall increase, because again, that's the dollar amount that people will be writing their checks for. And while it's I think I believe it worked out to $123 a year. That's not what we want. Obviously, it's just something that's a hard pill to swallow, but we also don't want to be the fastest growing municipality in all this and all the great things that we do, and in an innovative community, and a growing community, and a complete community, and then start firing people. That's just not the image that I'd like to have. So if we want to set council direction to staff, I would look at having them, if we're going to go forward with this, to come back with, set up an up to 3% overall increase, blended with the region and the education, because we'll be dealing with the region budget in 2 days. So that'll be pretty much set in stone. So like I said, that's my comments for tonight. I don't want to, it's a hard line to look at it, and believe in, when it was said over and over tonight, this is the toughest budget I've had to deal with. And I think many of us around this table, this has been hard. And we want to be able to provide the services for our community. We want to make sure it's as affordable as possible. Sadly, we don't have a core service review ahead of what we're doing now. And I know that in coming years that will definitely be a help. So if we're going to be looking at a staff, council direction to staff, I would look at that 3% overall blended increase with the region and the education.
So thank you, Councillor Clewett. I have Councillor Melbourne next on my list. And with that, I have a question for him as well. Councillor Melbourne, can you clarify your motion, please? That was seconded by Councillor Challoner. Was it 3% on town portion or 3% overall? Your original motion was to send it back to staff. Staff can come back with a number.
Yeah, to send it back to staff to come back with a budget in the range of between 2.5 and 3.5%.
In the town's portion or net?
The town's portion.
Got it. Councillor Chandler has seconded that motion, yes.
Okay, I have some comments. Is it my turn or you got somebody else?
You have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Again, I want to make it clear to staff that this is not a reflection on them. I believe with what Councillor Challoner said. I believe the direction that the previous council gave to staff of a range of 9 to 3% was too wide a gap. I believe, when we were on council before, Councillor Challoner, the target was always around 3%. That's the direction we gave staff. So again, we are to blame for some of it. I believe that, there are areas that could be saved. One of the things that comes to mind for me is how we're delivering the transit system. That's a $4 million budget. There's got to be savings in there, but it's going to have to take some make some difficult decisions that nobody seems to want to make. The other issue I have is how much are we spending on fitness centers? Are we supposed to be in that business? There's 14 private, I believe there's approximately 14 private sector fitness centers in Milton, yet we're running fitness centers competing against them. Is that an area that we should be looking at? Is that a core service that we have to provide? As far as, we're a growing community, and I understand the challenges we face with that. But with that growth is also increased tax revenues, the market value assessment that's higher. I had people complain last time. The media reported a 5.5% tax increase. Their taxes went up 8 and 9%. I was told it's because of the market value assessment of their homes. But they heard a 5% increase, but their taxes went up 8 and 9%. So that's an issue that we're going to face here. Again, I can't see us tonight, based on what we have and what I saw tonight. I put forward over $1 million worth of cuts. Council rejected it. So we're not getting anywhere with this decision package. it has to start again. So I think staff has seen where we're going with this, and when I look at the region coming in at 1.9, the library came in with a zero impact budget, and we're looking at 8.7. Okay. With that, I have an issue. So again, basically my last word, we cannot satisfy the majority out there while we're appealing to the special interest groups. We're going to have to make some tough decisions. Staff is going to have to make some tough decisions, and we have to prioritize, excuse my English, where we're going with this budget and where we're going in the future. And I think we have to start now.
Councillor Early, welcome to Baptism by Fire.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to echo what Councillor Tessler-Dirksen said, that we just want to make sure that we're not taking too much away from a growing community that's the fastest growing community, and the services are provided that are much needed. And I just needed a clarification too. Now, if we take this budget away and ask the staff to come back, how long do they need to come back with something that's different?
Glenn.
Through the chair, we'd be looking to, through obviously scheduling through the clerk and with council, we'd be looking at the February 4th date to be able to come with something of this order of magnitude. What we would do in the interim, because there are some things in the capital side of the budget that are time sensitive, whether it's getting the projects within certain key windows or planning processes going, we would probably look to bring something to council next Monday to get some pre-approval for some of the capital items, just to make sure we don't hurt anything on that side. But we would need something in the order of a week to 2 weeks just to go back as a team and start to figure out where we could be looking for this.
Thank you. And would we be doing it differently? Like when they come back, would the council be more involved, department by department, or will it be just one big consolidation?
It would be to a degree to the, depending on the nature of the options we bring. Obviously, I think given what we've heard tonight and similar to what we try to do here, we may look to bring a couple of different options, knowing that council's interest or focus may be different than our interpretation of the feedback we get through the various ways that we collect it. But it really would be depending on how many different potential ideas we have or how we achieve that 1.4 for you.
Thank you, that's all.
Councillor Di Lorenzo and then Challenor.
So $3.7 million, I mean, one question is realistically, does staff think they could come back with a 3.7 million cut that didn't lower service levels? That's one question.
I'd say no, there's definitely going to be service level implications for either of these two options.
So I think it's town council responsibility to make service level change requests. I think we're abrogating part of our responsibility. We've already gone through here different service level changes that what we are accepted and not accepting, and we have all the service levels in here. So if we think there are service level reductions that we should make, we should say that now. We have the opportunity. Otherwise, seem to be abrogating that responsibility to town staff, and they've already come back with recommendations on service level changes. We didn't like them. If we think there should be different service level changes, why doesn't a councillor make that proposal now? I agree with the core service level review, but that's many months away. That's not going to be in time for the 2019 budget. So I don't see how sending this back to staff for $3.7 million in savings is going to be possible without major service level changes. And if there are major service level changes, we as a councillor should be talking about that tonight, or we should have been preparing that for tonight's meeting.
I have a list of speakers. Councillor Challenor.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So there's, part of the reason why we're in this issue to begin with is just the way we're calculating a resident's budget, okay? When you look at going to a 3 or 3.8% total budget, the school board, the region and ourselves, you're essentially hiding our spending under the region's skirt. And you've been doing that for a long, long time. And it was a thing that is studiously avoided by most municipalities across this country, because eventually it catches up with you, and that's why you are where you are tonight. That's why you've had arbitration decisions of the kind that you've had, because they've looked at your ability to pay, and you've been spending a lot of money, okay? And so, you know, are there ways that you can get to $3.37 million this year? Oh, sure there are. Will there be service level cuts? Yes, there will. Do you consider it a two-stage budget that gets you to where you really should be moving forward when you look at other municipalities that are growing just as quickly as we are, and they're passing inflationary budgets? But staff need to come back with that. I disagree with Councillor Di Lorenzo. He doesn't have enough information here to have made any kind of recommendation tonight on service level cuts. Cutting a program is not truly a service level cut. It's much deeper than that. It's changing, in fact, how you deliver the service, or it's eliminating the service altogether. It's determining that it's just not needed anymore. There are ways to get there. I've suggested that that staff look at attrition. Essentially, have a hiring freeze, and you replace people who are critical to what needs to be done in the town of Milton going forward. Look at the fact that you already are competitive from a salary perspective and a benefits perspective, realistically. People will always leave for whatever reason they decide to leave. It happens every facet of life, whether it's the private sector, the public sector, the nonprofit sector. I think we have a pretty good program here in terms of remuneration. I understand it was just reviewed. Maybe you need to freeze for a year the grid. That's 1.7%. That's a lot of money. Nobody loses their job. People who perform well get paid for performance. I don't know what your attrition rate is. You know, I know what it is typically. I know what the average is. But these are things that have to be looked at, discussed by staff, and come back and as part of the solution. You know, and are there programs actually that you've been thinking of putting on the block anyway as part of the core services that review that could be moved up? Are there different ways of delivering the service that could be done in advance of the core services review that are more efficient? These are the things that you're going to have to be forced to take a look at, and I'm sorry it's being done through this process. But you know what? This is what it's come to. This is why we're sitting where we're sitting. I'm sorry. You know, do I expect $3.37 million tonight? I don't. But I think the point has been made. And, you know, yes, I'd like to see 2.5 to 3.5. That's the rate of inflation. No, I really don't want to see more of the same where we hide behind the region's skirt and pass along you know, a tax increase that looks reasonable when you look at the total, but when you break out what we're actually spending in the town of Milton every year and how it's increasing every year, it's not like we don't have more revenue. I believe assessment growth was what, about $1.2 to $1.3 million more this year, roughly, something like that. You know, a 3% or 2.5% tax increase. That's another 1.4 million. So you're looking at, you know, $2.6 to $3 million more in revenue on a $122 million budget. And then you're looking for cuts to get back to a reasonable rate. You know, I have to ask myself, what's going on here, guys? I'm glad we're having the discussion. I hope it's helpful. I realize it's going to be a challenge for you. I'll help whoever I can.
Thank you for that. Mayor Krantz.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, at the risk of sounding philosophical, I guess, on the discussion, I've got a couple of questions and I've got comments as well. I think I heard Glenn mention there before, and I'm working on the assumption that a motion will pass either the 2.5 to 3.5, and I think Councillor Chandler had mentioned possibly zeroing right in on 3. I don't have a problem with either one of them, to be honest with you, but I want to be clear what I'm voting on, whether it's between 2.5 and 3.5, or whether it's directly right on 3. I don't have a problem with either one of them. But just let's assume that one of those passes, and I think I heard Glenn mention about maybe coming back next week, and I know there's council next Monday night, and I'm just wondering aloud whether it's to the clerk, to CEO, or Glenn, is that enough time on the assumption that this motion passes again, or whatever time is reasonably needed? I think we should know that right up front.
Glenn?
Yeah, so to clarify, my comment about next week was strictly on getting some pre-approvals for capital projects. I think more realistically on the operating side, somewhere in and around the February 4th date, where we currently don't have a meeting scheduled, but timeline-wise, that would accommodate what we'll probably need.
And, Mr. Chairman, that to me, that sounds reasonable, for sure. I also know that if we had to, we could call a special council meeting or a special budget meeting. I know that that's an option for me and the clerk. But I'm also well aware of the timing of some of budgeting, getting them done as soon as possible. And like tendering, as an example, it's a big deal. I don't care whether you're tendering for asphalt overlay or tendering for some construction job, or for that matter, tendering for trucks and stuff like that. So the sooner the better that we can get it behind us, the better. Now, the 8% or 9%, however you want to round it off, Mr. Chairman, of course, I'm sure that it's no surprise to anyone that I can't and will not support that. Let me just, again, and many members of council, and including Councillor Chandler, alluded to it as an example with hiring freeze. I'm really pleased to see there was none of that this year. But, you know, a lot of us, including yours truly, was around in the last council. The last council, and I stand corrected on these numbers, but the majority last council supported hiring 25 or 30 individuals. That's where the biggest majority of our cost comes in human resources. I was on the losing end of that, but that was majority council, and that's fine with me. So that's where a lot of the cost comes in there. So that's got to be seriously looked at. And again, Mr. Chairman, on the assumption that this passes again, and I'm going to round it off at 3%, staff be directed to come back with no more than 3%. They don't have any other option. You and I could cherry pick, I guess, and we may have to do that when they come back at 3%. We might not like it. We might want something back in there. We might want to, you know, massage it. Getting back to Councillor De Lorenzo's point, sooner or later, we're going to have to decide ourselves as to what we want or what we don't want. But one of the things I've always attempted to avoid is micromanaging. Going to any staff person and saying, I want this in the budget, or I don't want that in the budget. I don't do that. But I can tell you, if push comes to shove around this table with all of the 9 of us, that will happen. What I think is right and what I think is appropriate. And again, majority of council certainly will rule. So the day of reckoning is coming, and there's some tough decisions that have to be made. Is everybody going to be happy with it? Not for a moment, are they? But it's got to be done. And one of the things, Mr. Chairman, that was alluded to before, and I think this municipality should be very proud of it as to being one of the lowest tax areas in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area. Just because another municipality is poorly run, I don't want any part of that for the town of Milton, and I'm talking about high taxes. I know who's the lowest in the GTA in H. The lowest is, believe it or not, the City of Toronto, and a lot of us, including me, know that it's artificially propped up. I also know who the highest is. That's Oshawa. And you'd wonder why, too. And there's everybody in between, but we're on the best, almost the lowest rung of that. We're the second best in the GTA. So what's that tell you? I think the municipality's been reasonably run, even with some of the warts that we're experiencing now. Councillor Clute mentioned that this is probably one of the tougher budgets that he had to deal with. It's not, as far as I'm concerned. You haven't seen nothing yet on some of the budgets over the years that you've had to deal with, and some of the, angst that you had to go through to make some of those tough decisions. So here's one individual that's more than prepared to make some of those tough decisions, I think in the best interest of the majority of the people, the majority of the time. It'll certainly not be in everybody's favor, I can assure you of that. It will not happen. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Krantz. I have a long list of speakers still. Before I go to speakers, just a quick question. The 3% on town's portion, what is that net? Because we should have that number. All right, well, as that calculation is happening, I have Councillor Best, Councillor Ali, and Councillor Malbouf. Just to clarify, a few councillors mentioned 3% net, but I don't have an amendment for 3% net coming in. Right now, the number is sitting at?
Sorry, I'm one question behind here. 3% net on the town side is 1.83 on the combined.
So right now, we're at 1.83. That's the motion on the floor. There is no motion on the floor to come back with 3% net. So, Councillor Best, you're next.
That's what I want clarification on, is what we're looking at, because I can justify it, because that's the difficulty we face, because unfortunately with the region, as the other regional councillors know, they have a lot of provincial funding in health and social services. Not enough to keep up, but it's close to like 30% of the regional budget. We don't have that. I believe our provincial funding is around 2%, and it's not going up anytime soon. So I appreciate all the ideas set out. Hopefully, staff now have some direction. I'm certainly supporting around the 3% range, because when you look at our staff, and I agree with the mayor, if you look at page 13 of the Corps' report to 068, our net for the town is $242 per 100,000 residential assessment. The next closest is Oakville at 313. And it goes up from there. So when we look at our percentage, it may seem high, but in comparison to other municipalities, they only got 2%. Yeah, that's because 2% based on a higher number. So we have to look at the math of this thing, and hopefully staff can explain it. But one thing I would also encourage staff, and I agree with Councillor Challoner's idea of a two-part budget, is possibly having a workshop to go over all these personnel issues, because we haven't had one in a long time, and also working out where we go with the core services review, because we're looking at some huge changes in our next official plan, and we have to start planning not only next year but the next 40 years. So let's get some information together. Let's make some decisions. And I agree, February 4th gives everybody some time, and the public to digest, and we can actually go out on social media and appreciate those councillors that did do it, and find out what the impact is, because we've done what we can tonight. I'm glad to see the ideas are put forward, but we really need to consult the public as well.
Councillor Ali.
I just want to say we need to come to a happy medium, and if the budget comes back and we don't like what we see and we feel like we need to bring stuff back or take things out, I feel like we could look at gradual increments or reductions where we come to this medium year by year. We agree that, we can do adjusted ratios or something like that, so we are not cutting too much. That is what I'm talking about.
Okay, Councillor Malbouf, and then I'll see if we have any new speakers.
Yeah, okay. I didn't think this motion would take that long, but okay. Again, I can't see us getting down to finding $3 million tonight. Like Councillor Challoner said, we're just spinning our wheels here, so hopefully we're going to vote on this soon. Again, I'm still staying with my motion of between 2.5 to 3.5. Give staff a little bit of latitude to nail them to an exact amount. I mean, if they come to 3.2, they don't bring it forward. So again, between 2.5 to 3.5, the town portion, to where it would get us around 3% combined. I can live with that, and let's see what they come back with. And I'll be more than happy to sit down with the CEO and every one of the commissioners and, discuss where I'm coming from. And like Councillor Challoner said, we're here to help as well, but we're not into the micromanaging business. I mean, I have my ideas, but I'm not in the trenches like they are. So again, I look forward to working with staff to try to get somewhere close to that 3.5%. So.
I have no other speakers, thank goodness. I have one more speaker. Mr. Zia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to assure Council that in the 25 years that I've been here, as far as I'm concerned, we have followed Council direction to the letter. So rest assured that whatever direction we receive from Council tonight, we will follow it to the letter and hopefully bring back something that is acceptable to all of Council. That's just a final comment.
I was going to have the final comment, if that's okay with you. Got it. Any other speakers? All right, seeing none, I actually agree with Councillor Tester-Dirksen, Councillor DiLorenzo, Councillor Lee, Councillor Cluett, and Councillor Best. And I don't disagree with what Councillor Melba and Shannon are trying to do, so I support the motion. But the staff actually, as far as I'm concerned, did come up with a proposal to take it down to 3.88%. We just chose not to cut anything. That's sort of on us. That's not really on the staff. I agree with what Councillor Chandler was saying as well. We do need a core service delivery review so we can deep dive more than we've been able to. I don't think we're going to get that until February 4th anyway. And I think what's going to happen is on February 4th, we'll have to make a whole lot of decisions that we could have just made today. And I'm okay with waiting, no big deal. But one thing to keep in mind, and I'm sure that a lot of your experience, at least in your parts of Milton, was the same. Through the entire canvassing, not a single person, not one, said my biggest issue is taxes, not one. Infrastructure came up a lot, roads came up a lot, transit came up, and in new parts of Milton, Ward 4 actually, the transit complaint wasn't empty buses, believe it or not, although there were some. Most issues were, I don't have a bus in front of my house, or the bus runs, but it runs hourly, so it's useless for me, it needs to run more frequently, and so on. And I think if we come up with 1.83% overall, I believe there'll be some people who'll be happy, but a vast majority we would have done a disservice to, because the issue is, and I said it last year as well, we could increase the taxes by 50% and still be lower than Oakville and Burlington. Like that's where we are right now. It doesn't mean we should. I believe every single member of this council wants to be the lowest tax municipality by a long shot. And I think we are actually lower than Toronto in the sense that their assessment is higher. So if you look at the actual taxes paid, we come out below Toronto. And I think we should stay lowest. But at this point, we're not just lower than another municipality. We're so far below that there's no fat left to cut. And that's what we struggled with today. And the analogy I use is that we've cut all the fat there was to cut, and we've sucked the bone marrow dry, and now we're sending it back to staff to try to come up with more weight loss. And I don't think it's possible, because there isn't anything left to cut unless we give staff direction. So as Councillor Malbouf mentioned, we perhaps shouldn't be in fitness. And I've agreed with him publicly in the past, and I continue to agree with him. So if such a motion comes forward, I will support it. But that's really something that council will have to bring forward and give direction to staff. Staff is not going to voluntarily come up and decide they shouldn't do something that council has told them to do. So if we feel that we shouldn't be in arts, then let's give them the direction. If we feel that we shouldn't be in fitness, and I agree with that, then we should give them that direction. Otherwise, what is staff going to do? They can't do our job for us. That said, though, when the motion will pass, when it passes, when the proposal come in, I do agree with Councillor Cluett, Nelly, and Bess. I do want to see that 3% net number as well, in addition to the actual motion. But I do want to see where we would be at 3% net. That's all I have to say. And Councillor Malbouf, so you get the last word.
No, but again, what you're commenting about, with my comment about micromanaging, okay? I just threw that out as a suggestion, but I don't have the numbers. How much would we save? Now, are there areas, I could sit down with Mr. Cripps and talk about where I want to see on transit, okay? Are there areas? And let's look at that. But again, we can't do that tonight, okay? But it's just direction to where, and I'm sure every member of council, if they have some ideas to present to staff about where major cuts they believe in, sit down with staff, help them, because we're going to have to finally make the decision. So that's why I'm saying, send it back, and I'll sit down with every staff member and go through it, and I'm sure other members of council will do the same, to give staff direction so that it does come back and say, okay, spoke to council, this is it. Okay? If we don't agree and then we still want to push forward our agendas, then we'll do it at that time. But right now, based on what we have before us, I can't move on, and like I said, we're just spinning our wheels, so let's send it back to staff. I think they've heard what we've had to say, and let's see what we come up with.
It's a good ask. So, Mr. Clerk, where are we now with the actual motion?
What we have is that council reject the overall budget as is, and that staff be directed to bring back options to reduce the town portion of taxes to 2.5%.
With a range of 2.5 to 3.5.
To get it down to 2.5, you would all automatically include the 3.5.
I want to give staff direction that they could, to look at going between 2.5 and 3.5. I don't want to lock in a number at 2.5 in case they come in at 2.7 and then they don't bring it to council, so.
Just so we're on the same page, do you mind reading the motion one more time, please?
That council reject the overall budget as is, and that staff be directed to bring back options to reduce town portion of taxes to 2.5 to 3.5%.
Councillor Best?
Just for clarification, if it was in that range, what would the net be when combined with the region and the school board? Because I know, we've got some questions regarding hiding behind the region. Looking at this, we're looking at $3 million. I think staff would be hard pressed. What would it be for the impact if we do decide to come up with this?
I believe it was 1.83%, Glenn?
Through you, that was at the 3% level. If we go all the way down to 2.5, it's getting more into the 1.65% range.
So in other words, below inflation rate. So, I'll leave it up to the councillors to decide, how much you want to cut, because you are looking at massive service cuts there. So if this motion loses, I would be making a motion to 2.5 to 3% for the net tax increase.
If I may be so bold, Councillor Best, do you mind, it might be better to move the amendment, so if the amendment passes and we're at that range, and then we can go lower with this motion. That might be a better way to go than the other way around.
I'm prepared to change the motion to the 3% total, if that makes it easier.
Yeah, I'd like to give staff a range.
Because we already know what the region number is, we know what the school board number is. So then all we have to do is get ours in line. So if that makes it simpler, I'll amend my motion.
I'm going to jump on that before anybody changes their mind. Mr. Clerk, 3% overall. Councillor Di Lorenzo, please don't.
No, I'm not throwing it. I just want to clarify. So 3% overall was around like the 1 million something in cuts, right? That's what we're talking about, 1.4. Okay,
all right, Mayor Krantz.
Mr. Chairman, just on that last point, let me be very clear. What are we talking about on the town's portion of that possibly blended or averaging that we just talked about, gross and net? And let's be very clear as to what we're doing.
So Glenn, and when you mention that, can you mention the dollar amounts as well, please? Thank you.
All right, so at a overall around 3% town, region, and school, the town's portion would be 6.35%, which translates to about $15. Overall, that's per $100,000. Overall, it'd be about $20.92. And just some additional context, I guess, if you look at where other municipalities right now are forecasting theirs, if you take the percentages out, a couple of our neighbors are looking around that $20 range in terms of, rights or getting the differential in sizes of budgets out of the way. It's about a $20 average.
Mr. Mayor Krantz?
Mr. Chairman, I'm prepared to support what the motion that's on the floor. And I want to keep away from what Councillor Bass is suggesting just because of that possibility of 6% on the town portion. So I want to make it very clear. And we all should be very clear on that. So, but Mr. Chairman, we can deal with that in a moment, or you can deal with that in a moment. But let's just assume that that original motion passes. What Budget Committee dealt with earlier on, can I assume that is etched in stone and that will not change when staff come back? I'm not talking about those items that were voted on and passed or rejected earlier on.
No, I believe that would be up to the council. Mr. Clerk?
I believe staff have heard loud and clear that you want new options to consider. And because nothing has been finalized through a final budget vote, If council wanted to go back and reconsider some of these, that would be fine too. But it's truly is up to council.
So, okay, so a lot of the discussion, a lot of the votes then is possibly all for no at this point? Could reverse it. Okay, I want to be clear that it's not etched in stone. Thank you.
Any other comment?
So to be clear, we are talking about 3% overall tax increase.
That is correct.
That's what we're asking staff to come back with, and then council can decide whether that's acceptable or not. We still have that option, but that's the direction to staff, 3% overall, and then if we find other cuts, then we'll look at it.
Again, I want to be very clear, 3 overall, that includes region and school boards.
That is correct.
The portion, if this was to pass, would be 6%.
That is the motion on the floor at the moment. All right, you all heard the motion. All in favor of the motion? All opposed? Motion carries. Well, I guess we're going to go into recess again until a future announced date. Yeah, so we're going to take a short break until potentially February 4th. Is that correct, Mr. Clerk? Yep. All right, see you back on February 4th.